We now come to the general debate on the 80th anniversary of victory in Europe and victory over Japan. I call the Minister to move.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I am honoured to be opening today's debate as we come together as a House and a country to mark 80 years since victory in Europe this Thursday on the 8th of May. And on the 15th of August, we will mark victory over Japan. In May 1940, in his first speech as Prime Minister, Churchill proclaimed, "Let us go forward together with our united strength." And that is what the country did. Their united strength carried that generation through 6 years of war, 6 years of suffering, and 6 years of sacrifice to preserve the way of life we enjoy and the values we hold dear today. From the evacuation of Dunkirk to the Battle of Britain to the Blitz, we remember those brave service personnel from Great Britain and the Commonwealth who served their country, those who paid the ultimate sacrifice for our freedoms. We thank you and we remember you. We remember those on the home front, the evacuated children, the women who stepped into essential roles. And I think of my Aunt Kath, my granddad's cousin, who went to work for the first time in a factory. And the Bevan boys, many from Barnsley, who worked down the pit to power the war effort. We are proud to remember their contribution and the lasting legacy of peace they fought so hard to secure today and always. I will give way.
Minister, I note an oversight in the Honourable Lady's contribution, but Northern Ireland also made a very significant contribution. There was never any conscription needed in Northern Ireland, and the great thing about it was the women filled the gap. The women worked in the aircraft factories, they worked in Harland and Wolff, they worked in engineering, they worked in the farms, they worked in the fields, they worked in the rope factory. All those things, 12,500 women made the contribution to support their men at the front.
No, he's absolutely right, and I'm going to come on to speak about Northern Ireland later in my contribution. I was delighted to visit a few weeks ago to see firsthand how you will be commemorating the VE Day. And he's absolutely right, because I'm sure members here today will be able to share how their constituency or families played their part in this effort. Commemorations this year to mark VE and VJ Day have been and will continue to be led by those with first-hand experience of the war. The government is honoured to be working with veterans and the RBL to bring this to life. However, as we mark 80 years between today and the end of the war, the number of those with living memory are becoming ever smaller. This year's anniversary may be the last where veterans who contributed directly to the victory can be in attendance, or where young people can speak to family members who contributed to the effort. I am lucky to have grown up hearing stories from my granddad who served in the RAF, but generations born today may not have those same opportunities to connect directly with veterans. It's up to us to keep their memory alive, and I will give way, yes.
To the Minister giving way. She talks about victory, and would she'd like to join me in paying tribute to Corporal Thomas Priday, who was one of the first soldiers actually killed in World War II from the 1st Battalion, the King Shropshire Light Infantry. And while she's paying tribute, I hope, to him and his relatives, also to pay tribute to the Shropshire Royal Horse Artillery and the Shropshire Yeomanry, of course, had a distinguished campaign in Italy.
Well, I, of course, join the honourable gentleman in paying tribute. He makes an incredibly important point. He's put it on the record. I'm really pleased to echo his sentiments. Because, as I was saying, it is up to all of us, as time continues forward, to keep that collective memory alive. I will give way.
I thank the Minister. And as we celebrate 80 years since the liberation of our continent from a fascist tyrannical regime, and of course, we must be forever grateful to those brave souls who fought and fell for our freedom. Does the Minister agree that we are within Europe once again faced by a regime hell-bent on subjugation and tyranny, and we must stand up to those aggressors and bullies and remember that peace is hard won?
Yes, the honourable gentleman makes an incredibly important point. I'm joined by the Defence Secretary who heard that point as well. I will give way, yes.
To the Minister, I'm enjoying her contribution. Well, does she agree with me? The reason we do 80th anniversaries is because they can be veteran-led. that will not be the case, sadly, in 2039. But does she agree with me, too, that it's important we start to plan for the centenary of the Second World War, because, having been involved very heavily in the centenary of the Great War, I can say the UK, if anything, began its preparations just a little bit too late compared with our friends and allies?
I think the honourable gentleman makes an incredibly important point, and it was what I was speaking to the head of the Imperial War Museum about just yesterday. We absolutely need to start to plan now. I will give way, yes.
The Minister is being incredibly generous, but she mentions the Imperial War Museum. Does she share my regret at the decision of the Imperial War Museum to close the gallery, displaying over 200 Victoria Crosses and George Crosses, which were collected by Lord Ashcroft and given to the gallery for permanent public display? And could she perhaps ask the Imperial War Museum whether even now they could reconsider that decision?
I've absolutely heard that point, and I know we've spoken about it previously. I know that my colleague, Minister Bryant, the member for the Rhondda, has had conversations with both Lord Ashcroft and the Imperial War Museum. He is the Minister responsible for museums. I will reflect those comments to him, and I'll follow up to the honourable gentleman in writing. I will speak about our national remembrance and celebration this week in a moment, but I want to touch first on how important that collective memory and legacy is. Now, this government launched a number of initiatives to ensure every generation, young and old, can connect with the history of their families and communities. Letters to Loved Ones has encouraged school children and family members to explore their family histories, looking for old letters and artefacts to help them learn about life during wartime and share them on our website. My mum and dad discovered some lovely letters between my grandparents during the war and just after, when they had got married. Now, to inspire young people to learn about what life was like during wartime Britain, we also announced Our Shared Story, which brought together a range of educational resources. This includes materials for schools from the Royal British Legion called I'll Remember, which focus on conversations between veterans and young people. People across the country will also be invited to watch The Next Morning, a brand new National Theatre production written by award-winning screenwriter and playwright James Graham. This short film focuses on the hopes, dreams and ambitions of young people after the Second World War. I have written to schools across my constituency to share these materials, and like all of the community engagement resources, they are designed to run through the year to VJ Day and beyond. Like our Tip Top Towns initiative, a call to action to community and volunteering groups to get their town or village ready for the commemorations, whether that be bunting, litter picking or crochet bonnets for letterboxes. I spotted one in Hoyland and in Darfield in my own area this weekend. Now, to deliver the VE and VJ 80 programme of events and national engagement, the government has worked with an array of brilliant partners, including the Imperial War Museums, National Theatre, RBL, Atlantic Productions, Arts Council England, the Together Coalition, the BBC, and of course, all of the DCMS and MOD officials and service personnel. I would like to express my gratitude for their commitment, and I would also like to take this opportunity to pay tribute to all those who are currently serving in our armed forces. I will give way, yes.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. I just will add one more to the list of that list of excellent organisations who are supporting this. The National Memorial Arboretum in Albury was really important that actually we celebrate VE and VJ Day in Staffordshire, where Reginald Mitchell, the designer of the Spitfire, was born in my honourable friend for Newcastle's constituency, and also at the site of RAF Lichfield, which was the busiest airfield in Staffordshire, apologies, during the Second World War, just down the road from Albury was, where we'll be celebrating there. Thank you.
It's absolutely right, and I'm going on to talk about the National Memorial Arboretum a little later in my contribution, and I was pleased to visit a couple of years ago. Now, we want the whole of the UK to feel included and involved in VE and VJ Day celebrations wherever they live and whoever they are. Events to mark the occasion began yesterday, with the cenotaph draped in flags overnight into Monday, the first time since the cenotaph was unveiled in 1920, followed by the military procession. This included over 1,300 armed forces personnel and uniformed youth. This was accompanied by a flypast led by a Second World War RAF Lancaster and featuring the Red Arrows. Indeed, when the news of peace in Europe arrived here in 1945, spontaneous celebrations broke out in the streets. Those parties were replicated with street parties up and down the country yesterday, and I was delighted to join His Majesty the King and members of the royal family to meet veterans at a tea party at Buckingham Palace. And can I take this opportunity to pay tribute to the fact that it is 2 years to the day since His Majesty the King's coronation. I was also pleased to attend the Imperial War Museum celebration aboard HMS Belfast. I know communities will have come together across the country in celebration. And of course, I thank all mayors and local authorities for the local events they have been and will continue to lead. Iconic buildings will be lit up this evening as beacons of strength and national unity, symbolising the return of light after an era of blackouts lasting 6 years and echoing the moment when the face of Big Ben was relit. From today until Remembrance Day in November, almost 30,000 ceramic poppies on loan from the Imperial War Museums will cascade from the Tower of London, recreating the World War I centenary installation in 2014. The poppies represent a wound at the heart of the tower that survived the Blitz, which is being unveiled this evening as we speak. Tomorrow, a special performance of the Parliament Choir will take place, and the Imperial War Museum and the National Theatre are working together to showcase their Letters to Loved Ones project and to premiere their new film the next morning, highlighting the huge impact that living history can have. On VE Day itself, an official service of remembrance will take place at Westminster Abbey before celebrations conclude with the VE Day concert. The concert, shown live on the BBC, will mirror this with a mix of music, poetry and the spoken word that reflects our proud national stories, values and culture. Through these events, we can make sure the legacies of those who gave their lives will always have the same profound impact. I will give way, yes.
I thank the Minister for giving way. This is a particularly poignant debate for me to attend today because this morning I attended the funeral of Betty Webb, a 101-year-old former Bletchley Park codebreaker who really epitomised the very best of this great generation. Will the Minister join me in paying tribute to Betty and thanking her as we lay her to rest for the sacrifice and commitment that she provided to the war effort?
I absolutely join the honourable gentleman in paying tribute to Betty. I thank her for her service, as I'm sure the whole House does. I would like to now thank my counterparts in the Scottish, Welsh and Northern Irish governments for their support and engagement. Thanks to them, events and services will take place in every devolved nation. To name a few, Northern Ireland will host a beacon lighting ceremony, and I was pleased to take up the invitation from the member from Upper Bands to see how her community will be marking the occasion. I know services and commemorations are taking place in Wales, such as the National Service of Thanksgiving tomorrow evening and the VE Day Anniversary Parade in Swansea on the 11th. I look forward to meeting my counterpart in Cardiff next week. This evening, the Royal British Legion Scotland and Poppy Scotland will host Scotland's salute concert at Usher Hall. I was pleased to visit the Scottish War Memorial in Edinburgh a few weeks ago to pay tribute to the Scottish soldiers who paid the ultimate sacrifice.
On that point,
yes.
I thank the Minister, and she's making an excellent speech, because as I celebrated with my Slough constituents VE Day, for example, in Britwell and the Royal British Legion organised event in Cheltenham, we reflected on the contributions of our family members, including my great-grandfather and my grandmother's brother and others who had fought during those conflicts. But does the Minister agree that those armies fighting for our freedom are very reflective and representative of today's modern-day Britain, and that we must use that very fact when countering those who espouse hatred and division?
The honourable gentleman makes a really, really important point, and I echo it. I thought it was another intervention. Okay, as we reflect through this week, we must of course remember everyone who supported the war effort, in particular the Channel Islands, whose courage is woven into the fabric of our freedom. The Channel Islands were not liberated until the 9th of May, and their story, like many, is one of hardship and perseverance. To mark Liberation Day, the Ministry of Justice will be flying the flags of Jersey and Guernsey in commemoration. I will be visiting Jersey and Sark at the end of this week to commemorate Liberation Day. I look forward to participating in the commemorations and to meeting and hearing about the soldiers, civilians and children who sacrificed so much. Now, the Second World War was truly just that, a world war, and Britain would not be the country we know it to be today if it wasn't for the Commonwealth troops who fought tirelessly for Allied victory. I am pleased to be working with the Commonwealth War Graves Commission as part of the VE and VJ Day commemorations to ensure that the commemorations are worldwide. They're global evermore immortal, will honour and shine a light on the stories of those from across the world who fought in the Second World War, visiting Belgium, Italy, Malta, France and the Netherlands, as well as across the UK, to bring the stories of British and Commonwealth soldiers to life. It is important to note that many of these service personnel continue to fight in the Pacific long after the war on the European front had come to an end. We will mark that contribution again on VJ Day on August the 15th. On that first VJ Day, 80 years ago, Clement Attlee, Prime Minister at the time, said to this House, "Thus the long, grievous war is at an end, and peace on earth has been restored." And indeed, those 6 years of war saw the generations before us make tremendous sacrifices to preserve the way of life we enjoy today. On VJ Day, the Royal British Legion will lead the nation in honouring those who fought and died during the war in the Far East with a service at the National Memorial Arboretum. The legacy of those who gave or risked their lives will always have a profound impact, and it is up to all of us to keep their stories alive. Once more, we have come through. As the poet Edmund Blunden said in his poem V-Day, moments of national unity live long in our memories, from the Olympics to our late Majesty Queen Elizabeth II's Jubilee. They bring us together and they remind us of our common communal values, how we pull together in times of adversity, how we show compassion to our neighbours, how we put our community before division in times of need. I am grateful that we, as a House and as a country, have had the opportunity to create another moment of such unity today and throughout the year, as we remember that great generation, all they gave and all they fought for.
The question is that this House has considered the 80th anniversary of victory in Europe and victory over Japan. Shadow Minister Saqib Bhatti.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank the Minister for that excellent speech, and I welcome all that the Government has done in preparation for VE Day and VJ Day. Madam Deputy Speaker, the 80th anniversary of VE Day and VJ Day are a time for the nation to come together and celebrate the conclusion of the Second World War, a war in which good triumphed over evil and liberated millions of people from the horrors of fascism. On VE Day, across the Western world, millions rejoiced, relieved that years of conflict and immense hardship were finally coming to an end. On the 8th of May 1945, British people, including Her Royal Highness Princess Elizabeth, flocked to the streets to celebrate the defeat of Nazi Germany and the liberation of Europe. People danced long into the night. They attended street parties and they looked forward to a brighter future. And we must not forget, though, that as those parties wore on, British and Commonwealth troops, as well as our allies, continued to take the struggle to Japan. It took until August 1945 for victory over Japan to happen. This day marked the conclusion of the war in the Far East, where we must never forget the sacrifices of the troops that helped liberate millions of people from Imperial Japan. I will do.
I thank the Shadow Minister for giving way. I wasn't going to make this point, but one of my constituents, Pam Gillespie, often leads the VJ Day commemorations in Harlow because her father, George Money, was a Middle East prisoner of war. Would you agree with me it's hugely important, and thank people like Pam, that we recognise VJ and recognise that the war in Europe may have been over, but there was still a war going on and many servicemen were still giving their lives?
I thank the honourable member, and on this point we are friends, because I thank Pam and the sacrifice of her family for all that happened on VJ Day. VE Day and VJ Day must forever be remembered and etched into our memories, and I'm sure that this whole House will agree with me that it is so important that we remember these historic days for years to come. 2025 is especially important. It may well be one of the last years in which troops who served in the Second World Wars are still alive. For the Minister, the Shadow Secretary of State has actually asked me to ask if the Minister can comment directly on his campaign to bring a statue of Vera Lynn home. The late Sir David Amess launched an appeal to create a lasting memorial to Dame Vera Lynn. Dame Vera Lynn's songs kept our troops' morale high, often in times of huge uncertainty and great peril. During the Battle of Britain, where it looked like the Nazis might invade Britain at any moment, she really did keep the bluebird singing over the white cliffs of Dover. The committee needed to raise £350,000 to complete the bronzing process and bring the memorial home from the Czech Republic. So will the Minister be able to confirm that this fitting tribute will indeed be brought home? Madam Deputy Speaker, every man and woman that served and serves in our armed forces stands up for Britain and the rights that we have fought for generations. Democracy, liberty and the rule of law. These values are precious and we are forever in debt to those brave souls who fought to defend this country. And as the saying goes, freedom is not free. So to all those serving, those who have served, and to all those who have sacrificed, we say thank you. Yesterday, thousands of people descended upon the Mall to watch all three services march in the excellent VE Day parade. And I'm sure the whole House will join me in paying tribute to everyone who took part, but especially the veterans who made the occasion so special. Today, Her Majesty the Queen will visit the Tower of London to see the 30,000 poppies on display that mark and reflect the sacrifices made by so many in the Second World War. And here in Parliament, there will be a celebratory concert taking part in Westminster Hall, where the fantastic Parliamentary choir will perform alongside some special guests. And on VE Day itself, nearly 2,000 people, including His Majesty the King and the Queen, and a host of veterans, will mark the 80th anniversary with a special service at Westminster Abbey. I will.
Would he agree with me that in addition to the fantastic array of events that we've got nationally to mark VE Day and VJ Day, actually the community events that we have in our constituencies organised by local community groups are really fantastic and give us a wonderful opportunity to celebrate and reflect on the great contribution of those who fought for our freedoms, including Project Pearly, who organised a fantastic celebration that I attended on Monday.
I think the Honourable Member makes an excellent point, and she's absolutely right. It is the community events that really do define the day for me. Over the coming days, alongside the national events, as I lead on to in my speech, thousands of people up and down the country will also commemorate this historic occasion with street parties, church services and concerts. In fact, Madam Deputy Speaker, in my own constituency of Meriden and Solihull East, we proudly remember our heroes. Every year in Meriden, in the very heart of England, hundreds of cyclists come to honour the cyclists who lost their lives in the First and Second World Wars. On Thursday, I'll be joining the Mayor of Solihull, who will be lighting a beacon at Elmdon Church, and later in the week, I'll be joining Visit Knowles street party. And of course, if I can, Madam Deputy Speaker, I pay special tribute to the Solihull Observer, who printed a special edition in commemoration of VE Day with stories of the heroes that come from my part of the world. These events, and many others from across the country, truly show Britain at its very best. Madam Deputy Speaker, in remembering that war, we must also remember that our victory was forged on our relationships, not just with our allies, but with our friends in the Commonwealth. Those troops that came from many, many different nations, of different faiths from across the world, Christian, Hindu, Muslim, Jewish, Sikh, and other faiths, who fought side by side, irrespective of their race or religion, to stand up for the values that we all hold dear. Their common goal, to stand against tyranny, to stand against evil, to stand for freedom. Madam Deputy Speaker, the conclusion of the Second World War marked the end of the last major conflict in Europe until Putin's barbaric invasion of Ukraine. And whilst we rightly celebrate the end of the Second World War today, we must not forget the horrific and brutal conflict taking place in Europe. We were all moved yesterday by the Ukrainian troops taking part in the parade. It reflects our country's deep and profound commitment to their noble cause, and once more shows that this country will not stand by whilst brutal autocrats seek to impose themselves on Europe. And Madam Deputy Speaker, while I'm deeply proud of the St George's flag and the Union Jack, I feel it is worth saying that I'm also proud of the Ukrainian flag that has flown on council buildings across the UK. It is a reminder that this country will always stand up to bullies and come to the aid of those who stand for democracy and freedom. I will.
Member for giving way. It's unusual for me to do two interventions in the same debate. When I think back to my personal experience and my family's experience of the Second World War, my tide fought in the war, my grandfather on my mum's side, who was Welsh. His war didn't end in 1945. He didn't come home until 1947 because he was part of the peacekeeping missions in both Italy and Greece. And does he agree that actually when we look at the situation in Ukraine, it's really important that we remember Britain's role not just in winning the war, but in winning the peace as well, and how important that will be in the future?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I could not have put it better myself. I think the Honourable Member makes an excellent point about the work that is happening now and that will happen going forward. And if I may, and indulge this House, I also note that Reform's flag ban policy would also stop council buildings from flying armed forces flags. A reminder that populism does not equal patriotism.
Where are they?
To conclude, Madam Deputy Speaker, at times of global uncertainty, reflecting on the Second World War always lends us some much-needed perspective. Remembering the history of the war and the causes of the war are absolutely essential, and I'm hugely supportive of the Government's work to celebrate the anniversaries of VE Day and VJ Day, and I look forward to members' contributions.
Very good.
Members will be able to see how many have risen to speak in this evening's debate. So there will be a 4-minute time limit after the front bench contributions. Samantha Niblett.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As we mark the 80th anniversary of Victory in Europe Day, and obviously later this summer we celebrate victory over Japan, I'm reminded of the extraordinary bravery shown by so many, including our very own Ray Statham from Newell in my constituency of South Derbyshire. 80 years ago, Ray was in the English Channel supporting the D-Day landings. Now, as he approaches his 103rd birthday, we celebrate not only his longevity, but the legacy of service he represents. Ray served aboard HMS Indefatigable with the Royal Navy, and I know the whole House will want to join me in wishing him a very happy birthday and offer him our deepest thanks for his service to our country. I'd also like to recognise Ken Ash from Repton, who served with the Royal Signals, and my own granddad, Fred Palmer, who served in the Royal Logistics Corps in the Army. Winston Churchill said that the surrender of Nazi Germany was the signal for the greatest outburst of joy in the history of mankind. And while for many that was true, for countless others, the end of the war was marked by quiet sorrow for those who never came home. Across the UK and overseas, the graves of those who made the ultimate sacrifice are lovingly maintained by the Commonwealth War Graves Commission. We have one such war grave in Swadlincote and Church Gresley Cemetery. Thanks to Glyn Jackson and Joanne Abbasi, we have a folder of names of those who rest in peace there. I'm so grateful to Shelley Lynn, who leads tours of the cemetery, for sharing those names with me. And I've written to the Secretary of State for Defence and the Minister for Veterans and People with their names in a roll call, asking for him to join me, or asking for them to join me in sharing gratitude for their service. Each of their names is a reminder of a family left behind, of futures never fulfilled. And what strikes me most is their youth. So many in their early 20s, some just teenagers. They had dreams, careers, and families ahead of them. And they gave all of that up for us. For me, this roll call carries an even more personal note. Many brave men and women served in the Royal Air Force as a volunteer reserve. And I myself have the privilege of taking part in the Armed Forces Parliamentary scheme with the RAF this year, gaining a small glimpse into the professionalism and sacrifice that defines our Royal Air Force personnel to this day. Madam Deputy Speaker, as we commemorate VE and VJ Day, let us remember those who fought and fell not only in victory, but in hope. And let us resolve always to be worthy of the freedom they gave us.
Yeah. Liberal Democrat spokesperson Max Wilkinson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. On the eve of war, Liberal leader Archibald Sinclair warned that a policy which imposes injustice on a small and weak nation and tyranny on free men and women can never be the foundation of lasting peace. He was speaking about the Munich Agreement, which saw European powers cede Czechoslovakian territory to Hitler. Now, nobody in this House would describe the brave nation or the people of Ukraine as small and weak. But with the spectre of the dictator Vladimir Putin looming large on the eastern edge of Europe and President Trump threatening deals to carve up Ukrainian territory, Sinclair's words resonate today as they did then. The wartime generation knew the cost of giving ground to tyrants as they celebrated 80 years ago this week. The best way to honour those who fought for peace is to redouble our efforts to preserve it. They, together with today's serving personnel and veterans, carry forward the legacy of service inherited from that extraordinary wartime generation. In memory of them, this anniversary must be a moment not just of reflection, but of a renewed sense of responsibility. This country is at its best when it works with its allies, not when it shrinks from the world. This year is very likely the final big celebration for veterans of World War II who are still with us. Now, there are 360 names on Cheltenham's War Memorial, and many civilians in my town also died in bombing raids. On VE Day, after 6 long years at war, people in my constituency, as those around the country, took to the streets to celebrate VE Day. At Wadden Primary School, children waved Union Jack flags. People lined up outside the municipal offices in the town centre to hear Winston Churchill deliver his VE Day speech. An effigy of Adolf Hitler was burned. The celebrations reportedly ran well past midnight, which is rather late for a genteel Cotswold spa town in the 1940s. It is right that we in this House pause to remember the scale of sacrifice and the legacy of the victory that generation gave us, because this anniversary is not simply about marking dates in a calendar. It is a chance to say thank you to the dwindling number of surviving veterans and to all those who have served, suffered and rebuilt. Today I think of Lorna, a 105-year-old I recently met at St Ives Court in Cheltenham, and very possibly my oldest constituent. She told me proudly about her contribution to the war effort as an intelligence analyst in Whitehall. I think of all those who served in the Gloucestershire Regiment, and I think of my two grandfathers, both of whom served, one in the Navy and one in the RAF. This anniversary is about ensuring we continue to stand up for what they stood for. We must use this moment to recommit ourselves to the international cooperation and diplomacy that helped deliver 80 years without a Third World War. A peace that has been threatened by Putin's illegal invasion of Ukraine. Now, it is no coincidence that European unity was born from the ashes of the Second World War. It has been the greatest peace-building project in history, and in the face of the threats we face today, we must once again stand shoulder to shoulder with our European allies. That means supporting NATO, it means standing up to aggression, and it means strengthening the rule of international law. And that does not mean, as some have suggested callously, that Ukraine should accept a deal to cede some of its territory to Putin. That would be a betrayal of the principles the wartime generation fought for. That includes those who suffered in the Far East. They have often received less recognition than those who served in Europe. The conflict there continued for nearly 3 months after VE Day, in punishing conditions and at immense human cost. Yet in too many commemorations, their stories are not heard. We owe these individuals our deepest gratitude, and it is good that we are remembering them this VE Day. And that gratitude to all those who have served must be expressed not just in words, but in action. Action to defend our democracy. Action to defend the British values of liberty, tolerance, and respect for the rule of law. And by respecting our veterans, by looking after them properly after their service is over, their mental health, their housing, their rights to compensation. This anniversary is, of course, not only about how we treat veterans, it is also about how we tell the story of the war and whose voices we include. The role of Commonwealth forces in securing victory is also often overlooked. Some 2.5 million Indian troops served in the Second World War, many of them in the gruelling Burma campaign. Troops from Africa, the Caribbean and across the Empire fought valiantly under British command. As a liberal and as an internationalist, I believe we must be proud of them. It is only right that today and this week we recognise the contribution of our Commonwealth soldiers.
Will my honourable friend give way?
I will.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. In my constituency of Harrogate and Knaresborough, we have the largest Commonwealth war graves in the north of England. They regularly put on fantastic events throughout the year, including at Remembrance Sunday and services and Christmas services too. Would you join me in congratulating them for the fantastic work they do in making sure that we don't forget?
I absolutely would. The second best spa town in the country, I'm sure, celebrates wonderfully well VE Day. And beyond parades and ceremonies, we must embed this fuller history into our national consciousness, because remembrance without inclusion is incomplete. Madam Deputy Speaker, this anniversary arrives at a time of renewed global instability. From Ukraine to the Middle East, we are once again reminded that peace is fragile. It cannot be taken for granted. The international order built in the aftermath of 1945 is under the most strain it has ever been under. The world is more dangerous than at any point since the Cold War. On all sides of this House, colleagues are so proud that many of our parliamentary colleagues have served in the armed forces, and we all stand with our armed forces. Finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to express my party's strong support for the programme of national commemorations planned this year. I think we can all be very proud of what is happening. These events give us all a meaningful opportunity to reflect on the courage, the resilience and the unity that defined the war effort on the front lines and on the home front alike. Let us mark this 80th anniversary not just with solemnity, but with resolve. Let us listen to the stories of those who served, from the soldiers to the evacuees, from the factory workers to the code breakers, and let us make sure that every part of their legacy is carried forward. Let us honour them not just with words, but with action.
Frank McNally.
Deputy Speaker, as with so many towns and villages across the UK, brave residents in my constituency, including grandparents of mine, were involved in all aspects of the war effort. Our towns and villages answered the call of service that took so many forms. Early in the war, Coatbridge hosted the Polish 1st Field Artillery Regiment for a short time after the evacuation of France, and so warm was the hospitality offered by the locals that the regiment later adopted Coatbridge as the mother garrison, and the town's coat of arms even emblazoned on the regimental standard. Despite their own hardship and struggles, local people in my community and across the Monklands area engaged in a whole raft of activity to support the war effort, from knitwear drives, charity concerts and cinema galas, to extend support not just for our own efforts but also to aid others, including the Russian Red Cross Society. In few places was the deep sense of common cause more apparent than in the support offered by the women of Coatbridge to the women of besieged Leningrad, and we think about the actions of Russia today in Ukraine, and I think those women would be frankly ashamed of the actions taken by Putin. Of course, when reflecting on these years, it is impossible not to think of our own families and the roles that they played alongside their neighbours and friends, ordinary people engaging in extraordinary acts. I think of the privilege it was to hear of their stories and reflect on those stories that went untold. I think of my maternal grandfather, Edwin Simpson, who fought with the RAF and whose wings I'm privileged to carry with me today, along with his squadron photo taken at RAF Yatesbury in Wiltshire in 1944, a crew that spanned the country and the Commonwealth. And of my paternal grandmother, Ethel McNally, who spent the war as a crane driver and was more than a little irked, I have to say, when, after the war, she was replaced by returning service personnel, something she never tired about shouting about. The role of women has been well discussed and will be well discussed as the debate continues. And at the war's conclusion, the Provost of Coatbridge Town Council recognised women for their role in the war effort, from the munitions factories, as my honourable friend referenced earlier, and weapons factories, themselves dangerous environments. In the same message, the Provost told of how the armed forces had saved the world for democracy, with their courage and steadfastness, their tenacity and grit. And Provost Pirrie's tribute is all the more moving as he had lost his son, Lieutenant Sidney Robertson Pirrie of the 1st London Scottish Regiment, just 1 month before VE Day. And as my honourable friend on the front bench mentioned, in Bellshill there were parties that lasted days, and those were well documented locally. No level of gratitude can be enough to thank those who served and those who died, including the hundreds whose names live on the memorials throughout my constituency, for the peace that they secured in 1945. We honour those who died and those who lived in that greatest generation. We commend their service and their sacrifice.
David Reid.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. At the outbreak of the Second World War, the National Service Armed Forces Act 1939 introduced conscription for all men aged between 18 and 41. Like so many of this generation, my grandfather, Harry Fry Davis Reid, born in Plymouth in 1913, received his call-up papers. On the 20th of June 1940, he reported for duty in Exeter. He joined the newly formed 12th Battalion of the Devonshire Regiment, the Devons, a battalion largely made up of conscripts serving for the duration of the war. Just 1 month later, the Nazi bombing of Plymouth began. the city he called home, where he had grown up, lived and worked, came under relentless attack. Friends, neighbours and fellow Plymothians were killed, streets were destroyed, entire communities changed forever. In the early years of the war, my grandfather helped defend the coastal areas of what is now my constituency, Exmouth and Exeter East. That knowledge speaks to me when I walk along local beaches at home. I often reflect on what it must have felt like to guard those shores under the threat of invasion, not knowing what would come next, only that you had to stand your ground. By 1943, the 12th Battalion had been redesignated as a glider-borne infantry unit within the 6th Airborne Division. Their mission was to fly into combat aboard Horsa gliders, unarmoured, fragile aircraft made from wood and canvas. Madam Deputy Speaker, the thought of falling from the sky into enemy territory under fire in such vulnerable aircraft is almost unimaginable, but that's exactly what they did. In 1944, my grandfather deployed to France for D-Day. He left behind his young wife, my grandmother, and their 2-year-old son, my father. While he went to war, his family remained under the shadow of the Luftwaffe as the bombing of Plymouth continued. Thousands more Plymothians would lose their lives. When Harry returned, it was to a city transformed by devastation and to a community that had endured untold suffering. But the war was far from over. In March 1945, his battalion took part in Operation Varsity, the airborne crossing of the Rhine. To this day, it remains the largest airborne operation ever conducted on a single day in one location. In the final weeks of the war, they reached northern Germany, just south of Wismar. There they maintained kit, kept sharp and waited, not knowing what horrors lay ahead. Victory in Europe was declared on 8th of May 1945. The Devons were granted leave and many attended a Thanksgiving service in a nearby village. Relief no doubt filled the air, but the war's final chapter was still to be written. In the days that followed, they came face to face with the unimaginable, the atrocities of the Nazi concentration camps. Those images no doubt remain etched in their minds forever. Madam Deputy Speaker, I never had the chance to meet my grandfather. He died many years before I was born, but I am deeply proud of him. His story, while personal, is not unique, and that's exactly why I share it. Up and down our United Kingdom, families carry stories just like this. Stories of ordinary people thrust into extraordinary circumstances. Stories of courage, endurance, loss and love. These stories are not rare. They are woven into the fabric of our nation. Though I have served in the Royal Marines and experienced war myself, I still find it hard to truly comprehend what that generation went through. Their sacrifice, on a scale few of us today can fully grasp, was made in the name of freedom, in the defence of democracy, in the defiance of tyranny. It was a burden carried for all of us. To that generation, our greatest generation, we owe a debt that can never truly be repaid, but we can remember, we can honour, and we can ensure that their legacy lives on. Because of their courage, we have lived in peace, and for that, I will always be grateful. We will remember them.
Can I remind members there is a time limit, and it is very unfortunate for me, I have to say, to have to interrupt the gallant member. Alex Baker.
Speaker, I'm proud to speak in this debate on behalf of the home of the British Army. In Aldershot and Farnborough, the VJ Day is woven into the very fabric of our community. And my words today have been shaped by my constituents who have shared with me their memories and specialist knowledge. Iris Monroe, who told me her story as a 16-year-old celebrating VE Day in her hometown of Aldershot, and Paul H. Vickers, a military historian who lives in Aldershot and who was a MOD librarian for 40 years. I want to thank them for their help as I try to do the stories from our town's justice. Aldershot stood at the very centre of the war effort. It was from these barracks and training grounds that thousands of brave men and women were prepared for service across Europe, North Africa and beyond. It was here that the troops were forged, not just in skill, but in spirit. And it was here that wounded soldiers found safety and solace in the Cambridge and the Connaught hospitals. My constituent, Iris Monroe, now 96, was the youngest of 9 children, and every one of her family played a role. Her 4 brothers fighting across the globe in the European and Far Eastern theatres, her father, mother and sisters active on the home front. She vividly remembers the terror of sleeping under the stairs as Aldershot was bombed, and how Lord Haw singled out the town as he tried to demoralise the population. But she also recalls the town's defiance and spirit of resistance as she sang, "There'll always be an England," to entertain her neighbours when they sought cover in the dirt-floored underground shelters as the air raid warning sirens wailed overhead. So Aldershot gave the Allied campaign strength in its most literal sense, playing a vital role in the preparations for the D-Day landings and serving as a hub for Canadian troops, more than 320,000 of whom passed through its gates during the war. Farnborough was the beating heart of Britain's aeronautical innovation. The Royal Aircraft Establishment based there became a crucible of scientific brilliance. It was in Farnborough that engineers and researchers developed the technologies that gave our pilots superiority in the skies: radar, advanced aircraft design, aerodynamics. It was a battle fought not with rifles, but with calculations and courage, and it helped tilt the balance in the air towards the Allies. Farnborough proved that war can be won not only with force, but with innovation. On the 8th of May, when news of Germany's surrender reached Aldershot, the town was united in joyful celebration. Fairy lights were hung in V for Victory formation on the fronts of homes. A pipe band from a Canadian unit led a spontaneous parade with hundreds linking arms and singing. Iris remembers singing with her friends from a youth club right at the front of the parade, with her mum proudly waving from the sidelines. In Farnborough, a grand dance took place at the Royal Aircraft Establishment Assembly Hall. The music didn't stop until 3 o'clock in the morning. It was not just a celebration, it was release. A lifetime's work of tension and fear was finally let go in laughter, in dance and in community. Among these joyful scenes, we also have to remember the personal stories. Norman Norrie Bartlett, who I was honoured to meet at Remembrance Day in Yateley last year, but who sadly passed away this March. He joined the Navy in 1942, underage at just 16, at the age of 16, and suffered the extreme cold and danger of both the Arctic and Atlantic. He was, I'm pleased to say, well enough, having seen both D-Day landings and the Japanese surrender, to make it to Normandy for the 80th anniversary.
Apologies. It's being disturbed by the whip. Charlie Dewhurst.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. If you were to drive around my beautiful constituency of Bridlington and the Wolds, it would be hard to tell that the area played such a pivotal role in the Second World War. Only one active military base remains on the site of the old RAF Driffield at Kellythorpe and is now used by cadets and occasionally for other training. But back in the 1940s, the countryside of East Yorkshire was littered with airfields, and the area played a vital role in taking the air war to Germany. I do not have time this evening to go into the detail about each base, but I will do my best to give the House a whistle-stop tour, Madam Deputy Speaker. RAF Bridlington was made up of a number of units, including air gunnery schools, initial training wings, air-sea rescue and marine craft units. Just to the north, RAF Bempton was established as a radar station, becoming part of the Chain Home Low network. RAF Cottam, near Driffield, was a satellite base, used only occasionally for flying and mostly utilised as a bomb storage site. RAF Cowden, to the south of Hornsey, was an RAF bombing range, and we are occasionally reminded of its past when bomb disposal teams are called in to deal with ordnance unearthed by the fast-eroding coastline. RAF Hutton Cranswick was developed as a fighter base with many Spitfire squadrons passing through. It was used not only by the RAF, but also by the Royal Canadian Air Force and several Polish fighter squadrons. RAF Catfoss, near Bransburton, had a small number of Spitfires and trained strike aircraft crews for operations in North Africa and the Middle East. The Huggett Wold airstrip was surveyed for a bomber base, but a better location was found nearby. It was, however, an airstrip was, however, created at Huggett Wold with steel mesh as a pop-up airstrip required for the invasion of Europe. and it's Bomber Command that perhaps has left its largest legacy in East Yorkshire. With its proximity to Germany, the area was home to hundreds of aircraft and crewed by men undertaking some of the most dangerous missions of the war in the skies over continental Europe. RAF Full Sutton, RAF Lisset and RAF Driffield were home to many of those bomber crews. Halifax bombers, Wellington bombers and others. The 158 Squadron based at RAF Lisset lost 144 aircraft in just 2 years, costing the lives of 851 airmen. They are remembered by a fantastic memorial on the Gransmore Road just outside the village. Now, it wasn't just the bomber air bases themselves. We had RAF Carnaby near Bridlington, which was particularly important military asset, as it was one of only 3 emergency landing strips in the country. It was 2.7 kilometres long and 230 metres wide, 5 times the normal width, and over 1,500 bombers made emergency landings there during the war, including the dam busters, who landed at Carnaby with their Grand Slam bombs still on board when they were diverted due to bad weather over their targets in Germany. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, while the RAF played a vital role in my constituency, the infantrymen of the East Yorkshire Regiment also served with distinction throughout the war. Their battalions served at Dunkirk and in India, Burma, North Africa and Sicily before landing in the first wave on Gold Beach on D-Day. Despite many casualties on that first day, they achieved all of their objectives and fought on through Normandy and all the way to Germany. Our area also has a French connection, as a number of regiments from the French Free Army were based at Hornsey under General de Clercq. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm delighted to have had the brief opportunity this evening to highlight East Yorkshire's rich wartime history, but I also want to pay tribute to all of my own constituents currently serving in the armed forces and to the 5,000 veterans living in the local area, whether it was Normandy or Northern Ireland, on land, air or sea, and on this, the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Europe. We thank you for your service and your sacrifice.
Alex Ballinger.
Madam Deputy Speaker, 80 years ago, Britain celebrated victory in Europe. The war was over, but the real achievement wasn't just the military triumph. It was the extraordinary effort that got us there. The unity, the resolve, the national determination to stand up to fascism and defend freedom and democracy. I've thought about that a lot over the years, listening to my granddad share memories of his time as a commando during the Italian campaign, as I watched my dad leave home to go to the First Gulf War, and as I served in Afghanistan. The message of VE Day has stayed with me. Victory is not just about those serving, it's about the whole country that's behind them. When I was in Afghanistan, we faced attacks daily from rockets, snipers and mortar fire, moments that still come back to me. But I remember just as clearly how our fight on the front line relied on so many others. During that time, we lost many good soldiers and Marines, tragically, but we learned. Our tactics changed, military surgeons developed new procedures, and the same innovation was happening back home. Our engineers were designing mine-resistant vehicles, better body armour, and equipment to jam radio-controlled explosives. That innovation saved lives, and in Ukraine, the same process is happening right now. I was there last month, where the Ukrainian defence industry has gone into overdrive to engineer the kit that will help save them from Russian aggression. There is no denying that we live in increasingly dangerous times. War is raging on our continent. 80 years on from VE Day, the idea of a lasting peace in Europe is a fading reality. That's why I support the government's plans to raise defence spending to 2.5% of GDP. Not because it sounds tough, but because it's necessary. However, if we are truly serious about security, we must go further than just raising the budget. We must ensure that spending builds strength at home. In 1945, it was British industry in shipyards, foundries and engineering firms that turned the war effort around. HMS Catterick, the ship my granddad served on before he landed at Salerno, was built in Barrow Shipyard. Industrial heartlands like the Black Country made tanks, armoured cars, weapons and ammunition. These places didn't just support the war, they made victory possible. Today, the Black Country still has the talent, the tools and the tradition. Summers Forge in Halesowen produces vital equipment for the Royal Navy. BB Price in Cradley Heath has been forging parts for ships, tanks and aircraft for generations. These are not relics of the past, they are the backbone of the future defence industry. This is because deterrence starts long before the first shots are fired. As we are seeing in Ukraine, a strong and capable military is essential to deter our enemies. This VE Day, as we honour those who served and sacrificed, we also have a duty to ask what country we are building today. Are we ready for the challenges ahead? Are we investing in the skills, industries and infrastructures that kept us free 80 years ago? We owe it to that generation and to the next to be bold, to rebuild our strength at home so we can face threats abroad, and to remember that Britain's security has always rested not just on the courage of its troops, but on the quiet determination of the people and places that back them. That spirit of 1945, unity, purpose, resilience, isn't a memory, it's a blueprint. And it's time that we followed it again.
Yeah. Alison Bennett.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In 1945, after 6 long years of hardship, sacrifice and loss, peace returned to a continent torn apart by conflict. When the news broke, in mid-Sussex, in our towns and in our villages, people gathered for street parties, shared cups of tea at Bring Your Own Cup celebrations, held Thanksgiving services and lit bonfires that could be seen for miles. There was joy, yes, but there was also reflection, for while victory brought peace, it could never undo the human cost. I recently met with a wonderful charity working hard to highlight the work of a specific group during the war, the Photo Reconnaissance Unit, or PRU, an essential part of the war effort. Among those who served and died in the PRU was William Coomer, a constituent at that time of Mid-Sussex. Flight Lieutenant William Edward Coomer was the son of William and Emma Coomer. He was born in Cookfield, West Sussex. Joining the RAF, he was posted to 680 Photographic Reconnaissance Squadron operating in the Mediterranean. He was taken ill on the 5th of December 1943 and was taken to the number 63 General Hospital in Salonika, Greece, where despite the use of an iron lung, he died of polio on the 10th of December. We thank him, and I ask the Minister whether he will support a national memorial to the Photo Reconnaissance Unit. And we thank the countless others who served and gave everything for their country. We shall remember them. Yes, I will.
I thank the Honourable Member for giving way. My constituent James Hares was also one of those brave pilots in the same unit. Despite having a death rate of about 48%, one of the worst during the war, he survived, only to sadly pass away on the journey home. We have heard from so many colleagues already about their stories, but these have largely been untold. Many for their crucial work they did to help the war, to win the war.
Order. If members are going to get in during this debate, interventions need to be interventions, not many speeches. Alison Bennett.
I thank the Honourable Member for her intervention and for the additional insight she's given into the work of the PRU. For me, coming from an army family, the kind of family who took me, aged 7, in 1984, on a tour of the D-Day beaches as a holiday, we remember our war dead. Our war dead must be remembered, and doing so matters to me. Their strength and sacrifice paved the way for the freedoms we enjoy today. That is why this anniversary matters. It's not just a historical milestone. It is a powerful reminder of the values we must continue to uphold: courage, unity, resilience, and an unshakable belief in the importance of peace. It's fantastic that Mid-Sussex is once again coming together to commemorate VE Day in the same spirit shown all those years ago. From a reflective service at the Burgess Hill War Memorial to community street parties and parades, and with the lighting of beacons in Victoria Park in Haywards Heath and St John's Park in Burgess Hill, this anniversary will be marked with pride, with dignity, and I know also with heart. Because VE Day is not just about looking back. It's about reminding ourselves of what was fought for: freedom, democracy and peace, and recognising how vital it is that we protect those values today. Sadly, we live in a world that still faces conflict and uncertainty. There are dark, divisive forces that seek to disrupt peace, incite hatred, and push to the side the lessons that were learnt 80 years ago. So on this 80th anniversary, let us remember, let us honour, and above all, let us ensure that the legacy of those who gave everything lives on, not just in our words, but in our actions. Thank you.
Melanie Ward.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm privileged to speak in this debate today with so many powerful speeches from colleagues across the House. I'm glad to have the chance to draw particular attention to the people of Cowdenbeath and Kirkcaldy constituency and the special role that my constituents and their forefathers played in securing victory for the Allies. The Fife and Forfar yeomanry were present at many of the Second World War's most crucial turning points, from the Dunkirk evacuation in 1940 to the Normandy landings in 1944 to the crossing of the Rhine in March 1945. Hundreds of young men lost their lives, and we will remember them. I also want to draw attention to the enormous contribution that women made to the war effort. Yeah. Having entered the workforce en masse in Kirkcaldy's world-famous linoleum industry during the First World War, the contribution to the Second World War effort by Kirkcaldy's women was invaluable. Women working at Nairns manufactured fuel tanks for Halifax bombers, and their biggest contribution was to anti-gas fabric for capes and gas masks. Such quantities could only be produced in Kirkcaldy, and this was a decisive factor in the Allied victory, as the Nazis could not manufacture gas-proof textiles in sufficient quantities, and so never used gas in air raids for fear of retaliation. And so, one of the most iconic symbols of Britain's war effort, and indeed its lack of use, is testament to the hard graft of Fifers, particularly our wartime women. Adding to their contribution were the thousands of Poles within the 1st Independent Parachute Brigade, stationed at Auchtertool in my constituency, who helped to fortify Scotland's east coast and set up anti-tank barriers and pillboxes from Burnt Island all the way up to Montrose, accompanying the fortifications on the island of Inchcolm in the Forth. The regiment later went into battle at Operation Market Garden in the Netherlands in 1944. Indeed, General Sikorski, the leader of the Polish government in exile, had a house in Auchtertool as well. I found a quote from Winston Churchill as he updated this very house on the death of General Sikorski in July 1943. Until the moment of his death, he lived in the conviction that all else must be subordinated to the needs of the common struggle and in the faith that a better Europe will arise. Many Poles made their homes in my constituency after World War II, and they're an important part of our community today. Yeah. The memory of those who fought in both World Wars and all others, and in particular of those who did not make it home, is kept alive by the fantastic work of the Kirkcaldy Legion. Their work, alongside the Kirkcaldy United Services Institute and the Hill of Beath Ex-Servicemen's Club in my constituency, also supports veterans in our area, and I'm glad of the work that our Labour government is putting in to support our veterans and their families. Yeah. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'd also like to commemorate the contribution of my granny, Isa McHugh, who served in a munitions factory, and my granddad, Sam Ward, who served in the RAF during World War II. Yeah. Civilians before the war, like so many, they stepped up to secure our freedom. And so, in the face of the challenges in our own day and age, in this debate, and on the 80th anniversary of VE Day on Thursday, we commemorate real people who worked, who served, who gave their lives for freedom and prosperity in the face of immense challenges. They are, after all, the reason why we are here today. Yeah.
Sir Julian Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and what an excellent speech to have the privilege of following. It's always so impressive when people do their duty right up to the very end. And so I ask the House to salute the passing of Normandy veteran Cecil Newton, who as recently as last year came back to Leap Beach in New Forest East and read out the names of more than 100 of his comrades in the Royal Dragoon Guards who were killed in the D-Day landings and beyond. And he was one of 6,000 troops who landed on Gold Beach, having departed from Leap Beach. And in his case, he was in an amphibious Sherman tank that actually made it to the shore. Not all of them did. And he survived being wounded in combat too, passing at the great age of 101.
Now, we've heard from many speakers about the connections between their constituencies and the military history of the Second World War. This was a theme on which I expatiated back in May 1997 in my very first speech in this House, and I will only repeat just one reference from that oration, and that was about when I discovered a small plot of RAF graves in Fawley Churchyard in my constituency, and I couldn't help but be moved by the inscription which had been put on the headstone of a young airman, John Burrow, whose parents had written the following: "Into the mosaic of victory we lay this priceless piece, our son." And I thought that that was such a wonderful thing to do in the depths of their loss, to say, nevertheless, this is what we are doing for the victory of our country over Nazi Germany. And I salute them and their memory too. Now, how does one do justice to the Second World War in a few minutes? I would just pick out one key factor without which everything else would have been different, and that is the existence of the English Channel. Because there can be no doubt that if we had been contiguous with the continent of Europe, we would have suffered the same fate as all our allies did on that continent. There is no way in which we could have resisted being overrun, and when you think about how difficult it was to re-invade and retake the continent for democracy in 1944, even when you had Britain as the launch area for that invasion, you can realize how virtually impossible it would have been without the United Kingdom remaining outside Nazi German control. And you can look at the areas covered by a simple listing of the campaign stars that were awarded: the Atlantic Star, the Africa Star, the Italy Star, the Burma Star, the Pacific Star, the France and Germany Star, and much belatedly the Arctic Star as well, for the brave men of the Merchant Navy and the Royal Navy who risked everything to get supplies to Russia. But let us not forget one last thing. When the war ended, the country for which we went to war, Poland, remained under occupation by the Soviet Union. And it took another 44 years of determined deterrence, coupled with the nuclear balance of terror, to ensure the eventual emergence of democracy in that country too.
Sir John Joseph.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It is a pleasure to be called to speak in this debate to honour the sacrifice our communities made during the Second World War and to celebrate the victory of democracy over tyranny. I began VE Day week by paying my respect at Hawkinge Cemetery in my constituency. There are 96 British military personnel buried there, mostly airmen who made the ultimate sacrifice during World War II. Those airmen would have flown from RAF Hawkinge, part of which is now the site of the Battle of Britain Museum in Kent, housing the world's largest collection of Battle of Britain memorabilia. I would urge all members of this House, if you get a chance, please make a visit there. RAF Hawkinge was the nearest Royal Air Force station to enemy-occupied France. The nearest Luftwaffe fighters in Calais were just 6 minutes flying time away. As a result, the Air Force Base and the villages in the surrounding area became a regular target for Luftwaffe bombs. With the areas around Dover and Folkestone also subjected to long-range cross-channel shelling from German artillery batteries stationed along the French coast, it is little wonder that this area soon became known as Hellfire Corner. After the Battle of Britain, RAF Hawkinge continued to play a vital role throughout the war, with British, Commonwealth and other Allied pilots flying bomber escorts, reconnaissance and intruder missions from there. Indeed, Hawkinge played a pivotal part as a frontline fighter station in 1944 against Hitler's V-1 flying bombs. Operation Diver was the code name given to the RAF strategy to intercept and destroy V1 flying bombs before they reached London. RAF Hawkins' location and its proximity to Nazi-occupied France meant it was used as a forward base for fighter aircraft to save countless lives by intercepting the flying bombs before they reached the capital. However, despite all the various planes that flew from RAF Hawkins during the war years, it is the Spitfire that has a particularly close connection with the aerodrome. Turning to another part of my constituency during the war, Ashford Railway Works was also a prime target for German bombers. There were around 4,000 air raids alerts sounded and bombs fell regularly in the area around the railway works. Although there were many fatalities as a result of these bombing raids, the most devastating took place on 24th March 1943. On this day, an air raid that lasted around 3 minutes resulted in the deaths of 52 civilians and 1 RAF pilot on the ground. A further 78 people were seriously injured. Although the railway works was the main target, the surrounding areas were also badly hit. During the raid, a bomb fell on Beaver Road Primary School. Thankfully, the siren sounded in a time and the children managed to get into the playground shelters. As a parent, I dreaded to imagine the panic and fear this bomb caused. It is little wonder, therefore, that long before the call clear sounded, parents are rushed to the school to find out what happened to their children. When they got there, they found they were thankfully unharmed. The head teacher, Mrs. Adams, received an award for her actions on that day, which ultimately saved the lives of the children. Today, I am pleased to have had the opportunity to speak in this debate and to recognise the sacrifices made throughout Ashford, Hawkins and villages, as well as honouring the legacy of all those who lived during the World War II. We should recognise it is our duty today to continue to uphold the values they sacrificed so much for.
Dave Dugan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. 85 years ago, we saw the forces of fascism rise up to threaten democracy and freedom in Europe. Forces of darkness that would seek to control and oppress, to subjugate and exploit the people of these islands if they could prevail, but they did not prevail. We owe our current reality to the bravery and heroism of those who gave their lives in order that we may maintain the way in which we continue to live our lives. In Scotland, generations lost, villages and towns hollowed out of their breeding age, men, barely men at all in often cases, in their productive prime sent to die in a foreign and distant place amongst the deafening and unrelenting roar of mechanised warfare, seeing their friends and neighbours die and drawing their own last breath, desperate for a kind word or a mother's soothing touch, an absent reassurance and a short life slammed shut. A far cry from the cheerful boy's own adventure. We'll be home soon. Nobody got home soon. Many didn't return at all, and many more of those that did would never be the same again, because that's the way it is with wars in the past. A legitimate desire to lock it away in a box out of sight. Nice if you can manage it, but many could not. For many families, it was the slow heartbreak of irreparably damaged, either physically or psychologically, husbands and the distant silent fathers who returned, never quite able to access the men they were before the war. Total war, Madam Deputy Speaker, has a long tail, and it's still visible on these islands 80 years later in society, in the economy. Indeed, the war debt to the United States was only fully repaid in 2006. And if they hadn't have evacuated the war stores from Coventry to the Perthshire Hills between Ammanbank and Meriden, and I wouldn't have got a job there in 1989, and I can guarantee you if I didn't work for the Ministry of Defence, I wouldn't be standing here today. Scotland stood tall in those darkest of times, militarily, economically, industrially and culturally, just like our neighbours in England, Wales and Northern Ireland, and our neighbours in Norway, Denmark and the Low Countries. Scotland's shipbuilding, coal mining, locomotive manufacturing, agricultural output and production of steel were all pivotal to the war effort. And while young men fought, an army of older men and women toiled in the factories and the fields, equipping those at home and those in peril, defending that homeland. Scotland's industry and geography made Scotland a target for the Luftwaffe, and the first aerial combat above the United Kingdom and the Second World War happened in the Firth of Forth, where the Luftwaffe targeted Royal Navy ships anchored off Rosyth. And while London's horrendous blitz raged on for 8 long months, towards the end of that period, Clydebank's blitz lasted just 2 nights. But on those 2 nights, in March 1941, the Luftwaffe killed 1,200 civilians and injured a further 1,000 civilians and destroyed 8,500 homes in that town. 85 years ago, in Europe we saw the forces of fascism rise up to threaten our freedom. Then the superior forces of freedom and liberty rose higher still to crush fascism down where it belongs. 80 years after the end of that war, autocracies are still alive and well in our world today. To honour those that paid for our freedom with their own lives, we must remain forever alert to the fragility of our freedoms. We owe them all so much, and the absolute least that we can do to acknowledge their selfless sacrifice is to never ever forget that liberty and vigilance go hand in hand.
Catherine Fuchs.
Madam Deputy Speaker, this week I am privileged to be attending commemoration events across the constituency to commemorate the 80th anniversary of VE Day and the sacrifices of those who fought in the Second World War, including veterans such as David Edwards and Tom Griffiths, who have a school named after them in Mondrainville in France, having helped liberate the village. And in Monmouthshire, we will also be reflecting on the 110th anniversary of the Second Battle of Ypres, when the 3rd Battalion Monmouthshire Regiment had almost 700 casualties. Monmouthshire veterans and the Abergavenny Royal British Legion will unveil a new commemorative bench to mark both this event and VE Day on Thursday. And whilst we take time to remember those who have served in decades gone by, it's also extremely important to remember those who are committed to serve now and recently in our armed forces and give recognition to their contribution to our national security and peace. Monmouthshire boasts a fantastic armed forces community because of its strong sense of camaraderie and support. We have a vibrant Royal British Legion presence in Abergavenny, Caldicot, Chepstow, Monmouth and Usk, as well as cadet groups across the county. There are so many people I could name involved with this work, but in particular, I want to pay particular tribute to Peter Farthing, who was recognised this year for his outstanding contribution to the Abergavenny Royal British Legion. He works tirelessly for veterans across Monmouthshire, from remembrance services to fundraising to welfare support. I am so glad and thankful that this government is committed to strengthening support for our veterans and our armed forces community. Veterans today can face serious challenges and they deserve the greatest level of respect for their service and the many sacrifices they have made in its course, and this extends to the families who support them. So I'm proud that this government will put the Armed Forces Covenant fully into law to strengthen support for serving personnel and veterans and ensure everyone who has served or continues to serve and their families are treated with fairness and respect. In attending commemoration events this week, all of us across the House will remember and recognise the bravery of those who fought in the Second World War, both those who saw VE Day and those tragically who did not. But we must also remember those who have served each day since then, from 1945 right up to the present day. We owe them a huge debt of gratitude to all those who've served, those who continue to serve our great country, and who allow us to live in peace.
David Mundell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'm looking forward to marking VE Day on Thursday in the Royal Borough of Sangker, which is part of Upper Nithsdale's proud military heritage, and at the beacon to be lit at Hasshill in Lockerbie and at a parade in Dumfries on Saturday. What the ministers and yourself, Madam Deputy Speaker, might not know was that the end of the war in Europe was first announced in Dumfries because the then Provost Fife jumped the gun and announced the end of the war in Europe at 12 p.m. So local newspaper reports are clear that by the time Churchill made the official announcement at 3 p.m, despite pouring rain, the party was well underway in Dumfries. I want to reference two individuals who are so strongly related to the war, but at different ends of the spectrum. One is Air Chief Marshal Lord Hugh Dowding, who was born in Moffat. And Lord Dowding is the man who masterminded the Battle of Britain. And it is generally accepted that he played such a crucial role in ensuring that Hitler's Operation Sea Lion, the proposal to invade this island, did not succeed. He was a tactical genius, knowing how to manage the RAF resource and ensuring that there had been detailed preparations of the air defences. The other person is called David Shankland, MBE, and he was a great character in my local community growing up. Davy, like a lot of people, was involved in an incident which wasn't an attack by the enemy. It was a ship carrying munitions blowing up in Bombay Harbour. And that ship, the SS Fort Stinkay, blew up and took down the ship that Davy was on, called El Hind, as well. And about 1,300 people perished in that incident, and Davy was one of only 6 people on his vessel to survive. And he took that as a message that he needed to dedicate the rest of his life to public service. And that's what he did. When he was demobbed, he became a nurse. He was the first male nurse, a state-registered nurse in the south of Scotland, and went on to be a very distinguished nurse tutor. And that's the sort of impact of the war, people taking that and making it a positive experience. I also want to mention my own mother, Dora. She was 13 when the war began, but as soon as she was 18 in 1944, she volunteered and became an army cook and went from rural south of Scotland to Norfolk. And her abiding memory of the war was D-Day, having cooked the night before for a full and overflowing canteen. And as she said, the next morning going in and there only being 4 old men to serve. But my aunt, who remained in the south of Scotland, she also had to work on the farm. She was 19. She worked throughout the war as a farm labourer because, as others have referenced, there just weren't men to do that. And we pay a tribute to those people, even if they hadn't a formal capacity. The final point, which I'm very, very pleased a number of members have raised, is VJ Day. The KOSB from the south of Scotland were heavily involved in the Eastern campaign, and people never really felt that they got the acknowledgement that they deserved because people felt the war had ended, and yet it hadn't.
We still have a number of speakers trying to get in, so we will have the speaking limit at 3 minutes, and I call Jen Croft.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. VE Day, especially this year, offers us the chance to reflect with gratitude on the sacrifices made by those in the armed forces and those on the home front to defend our way of life and freedoms from tyranny. A few weeks ago, I had the pleasure of visiting Thurrock Museum's exhibition marking the 80th anniversary of victory in Europe. And they take their jumping off point as a picture taken at the time of a VE Day celebration in Grays. And you're invited to look at the joy that's on the faces and the celebration. There are children dancing spontaneously, there's bunting up, there's cakes being served, but also to reflect on what's going on behind the picture. The fact that people in those photos will be waiting the return of loved ones for some months, and they may be waiting for loved ones who were never to return. And also to reflect on the extraordinary sacrifice of those on the home front and what a change it made to their way of life. I took a moment to pause on some of the lyrics sung by Vera Lynn. We often think of them as very upbeat and very patriotic and bringing us all together, but even looking behind the words to the talking of the bluebirds over the white cliffs of Dover, she speaks about a return to normality. Little Jimmy will get to sleep in his own little room again. And we can only think about what that meant to have to every evening when those sirens go off, take your children down to an air raid shelter wondering if you'd ever emerge and on what you were emerging to. So while it was a moment for celebration, it was also a moment perhaps to reflect on the great loss and sacrifice that people made. And it takes as well, it's jumping off, there's a setup that is made to look like a D-Day celebration, and they have photos of those who might have been around the table, and we are allowed to explore the stories of 10 very extraordinary Thurrock residents and the lives they led during the war. And I'd like to highlight two that were very standout. Charles Corder from South Stifford, an RAF navigator who was awarded the Medal for Conspicuous Gallantry, and Vera Robertson, who was a civilian from Little Thurrock, who assisted the Norwegian resistance by sheltering them at her flat in Norway. The war definitely changed the course of people's lives, and it also brought about social change. And I'd just very briefly like to touch on the fact that 80 years ago, VE Day marked the return of over 300,000 disabled servicemen and women, something which led to the first ever piece of legislation considering the needs of disabled people. So the war did act as a catalyst to change and learn, and in this spirit I hope that by commemorating the anniversary this year, one of our very last chances to join with those who served, we also take the moment to learn our own lessons, to learn from the values of hope and freedom over evil and tyranny, to pledge to honour the values that those great servicemen and women fought to protect, and to learn from the bravery, courage, compassion and sacrifice of those on the home front, to face down hatred and division in our society, support those in need and champion the values that bring us together as a nation.
Ben Obsojecti.
Deputy Speaker, like many of my generation, my grandfather served in the Second World War, and though I was never old enough to ask him about this before he passed away, I was always very proud to have had a relative that had taken part in the Second World War. I was proud that he had served in the Desert Rats during the North African campaign, and I was honoured to follow in his footsteps when I served in the 7th Armoured Brigade, the Desert Rats, during operations in Iraq 65 years later. The Second World War left an indelible mark on our nation. Its impact ripples throughout so much of our culture, our heritage and our identity. I'm certain that it had a huge influence on my interest in the military that led to my own desire to serve. My former regiment, the Duke of Wellington, saw action in France, Tunisia, Italy, India and Burma. Battle honours at Anzio in the Italian campaign and at Sitang Bridge in Burma, operating as Chindits behind Japanese lines at Imphal and Kohima. These were campaigns that played a crucial role in securing victory over Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan. My own Huntingdon constituency played a key role throughout the war. RAF Molesworth opened in 1941 with the Royal Australian Air Force's 460 Squadron operating Wellington bombers. After 460 departed, the United States Army Air Force soon arrived and is most closely linked with the 303rd Bomb Group, popularly known as Hell's Angels, arriving with B-17s in September 1942. They launched the first US Army Air Force bombing raid over Nazi-occupied Europe later that year, and the USAF remains at RAF Molesworth to this day and is still embedded in the local community across Huntingdon. RAF Whitton was also a key player as the home of the Pathfinder Force from 1942. The Pathfinder Force were an elite unit tasked with leading RAF Bomber Command's nighttime raids deep into the skies over Germany and locating the target at a time when nighttime bombing was suffering from poor results owing to missing the target. But that role was not without risk. From 1942 to 1945, the Pathfinder Force flew a total of 50,490 sorties against some 3,440 targets, and at least 3,727 members were killed on operations. The activity at RAF Molesworth and RAF Whitton is a significant reminder of how vital a role the RAF played, but also the sacrifice and work of our allies and US personnel throughout the war. To conclude, I pay tribute to all those who did so much so that we can live freely. Normal people asked to do things that nobody should have to, make incredible sacrifices, endure terrible suffering, and experience tragic losses. The Second World War was a defining moment in our nation's history, more so than any event in living memory. But as those who experienced it pass and the first-hand memories are lost, it is easy to forget what was done by so many, but we must never forget, and we will remember them.
Elaine Stewart.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. On VE Day, Captain Harry Richardson of the RAF from Ochiltree in Ayrshire was half a world away. VE did not mean the end of all conflict. The war with Japan continued despite extensive service in Europe. Captain Richardson was still on active duty in India as a bomber pilot. While the country celebrated, Captain Richardson and many others fought to keep the peace. He flew 62 bombing missions over Germany, Europe, Burma and Malaysia until 1947. When Japan surrendered, leaving the RAF as a flight lieutenant, he earned Distinguished Flying Cross, War Star, Aircrew Europe Medal, Burma Star and the Defence Medal. This year, Captain Richardson celebrated his 107th birthday and will travel to London for VE Day commemorations. Not all veterans reach 107, so it is also important to pay tribute to those who have fallen. This week I will visit Untold Stories, an exhibition in Girvan Library. Richard and Lauren Conahan of Girvan and District Greater War Projects present local stories from the war, aiming to inspire our younger generation. One story is of Corporal Norman Nicholl Campbell. He joined the Pioneer Corps, leaving his wife Mary and 4-year-old son Malcolm. In Dunkirk in 1940, Norman was taken as a prisoner of war to Stalag 8B in Lambeth, Poland. By August 1940, his wife had passed away from cancer and his 8-month-old son had also died. Corporal Campbell died of a cardiac arrest in 1943, 2 years before VE Day. He was laid to rest in Krakow in 1948. This story is a stark reminder of sacrifices made by so many and their loved ones during this war. As we celebrate VE Day 80 years on, it is right to remember everyone who has made that possible, and we thank them.
David Chadwick.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. 80 years ago, when the guns fell silent, the long and bitter war against tyranny in Europe was over. Britain's peace was marked not only by celebration, but by gratitude and reflection on all that had been sacrificed to make it possible. Across my constituency of Brecon, Radnor and Cwmtawa, that peace had been fully and faithfully earned, with courage, with resolve and at great cost. From every corner of the constituency, men and women stepped forward to serve, in the air, at sea, on the front line and at home. Their names are etched into memorials across our communities, not only to remind us who they were, but of what they gave. Brecknockshire, with its long-standing military tradition, stood as a proud centre of that service, but the uniform was worn across the constituency, in the hills of Radnorshire, in the valleys of Cwmtawa and beyond. Among them were those who served with distinction in local regiments, such as the South Wales Borderers and the Welsh Regiment, both of which saw action across Europe, North Africa and the Far East. The Royal Navy also bore our town's name with pride. HMS Brecon, a Hunt-class destroyer, served with honour in the Atlantic and the Mediterranean, carrying the name of Brecon wherever she sailed. Others served in different ways, but with equal resolve. In the Swansea Valley, local men were conscripted as Bevan boys, sent into the deep and dangerous seams of the South Wales coalfield to mine the coal that powered our fleets and fuelled the wartime economy. Their work was exhausting and often overlooked, but vital to victory, and many of them were not released until 1948. In the fields of my constituency, the rhythms of farming did not cease. Amid rationing and relentless shortages, Welsh agricultural workers and the land girls who stood beside them kept the nation fed. And across the constituency, women took on vital responsibilities in munitions factories, in hospitals, in civil defence, and at the heart of their communities. Their contribution was lasting. It shaped the peace that followed and the freedoms we live by today. I was proud to attend the commemorations last Saturday in Ystrad, organised by Jade and the Swansea Valley Armed Forces Club, where that contribution was honoured. Let our remembrance be a promise to live up to their example, to work together for the public good, and never to forget what was given in the hope of a fairer future. And finally, I'd like to pay tribute to RAF War veteran John Gwynn, a worthy guest of honour at recent VE Day celebrations in Talgarth, age 104.
Tim Rocker.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Before reflecting on the anniversary itself, I want to pay tribute to the Royal British Legion and its volunteers. I have a dicky bow here that the Bellington branch of the Legion, one of the oldest in the country, have kindly given me, and I'll be wearing it with pride on Thursday. They, along with other Legion RBL volunteers across the wider Cheshire area and indeed the country, we owe them a debt of gratitude for their dedication, which is a living legacy of service. Madam Deputy Speaker, during the war, communities across Macclesfield answered the call to duty. Mills and factories pivoted to produce essential war material, from uniforms to parachutes and engine components, helping to sustain our armed forces. Thousands of the iconic Lancaster bombers were assembled at Woodford Aerodrome, and on the front lines, the Cheshire Regiment served with distinction from the deserts of North Africa to the bloody hills of Italy and on the beaches of Normandy. Cheshire soldiers were at the heart of the fight to liberate Europe. Their bravery and sacrifice, part of the great national effort that we're talking about here today. And in the air, RAF pilots from Macclesfield also did their bit. Eric Bann was a member of the Macclesfield Aeronautical Society, joining the RAF at the outbreak of the war. And he went on to fly 60 missions in the thick of the action from the outset. Shot down in the Channel in July 1940, he still managed to take back to the air Downing, a Messerschmitt and a Heinkel in the following weeks. But on the 28th of September, his Hurricane was attacked whilst patrolling over the Isle of Wight. Witnesses saw his plane ablaze before he bailed out, and tragically his parachute failed to open. His death was front-page news in the Macclesfield Courier, which praised him as a glorious example of courage, gameness and determination. So even with victory, the cost was staggering. 400,000 lives lost, cities bombed, homes destroyed. Economically, the war left our country exhausted, and psychologically, as members have pointed out, the trauma ran deep for those who fought, for those who waited, and for those who mourned. And as we meet here today, war once again strides across our continent. The invasion of Ukraine by Russia, bringing back scenes we hoped never to see again. Cities in ruins, civilians targeted, millions displaced. And so it is for us a bitter reminder that peace cannot be taken for granted, and the values we fought for are still under threat, that tyranny unchecked only grows bolder. VE Day is not just a day of remembrance, it's a call for resolve, a reminder that we in Macclesfield and across the United Kingdom choose peace, but that we must be ready to defend it. And I want to end with some of my favourite words from the man who led us through that conflict, Madam Deputy Speaker. In all our long history, we've never seen a greater day than this. Everyone, man or woman, has done their best.
It's a pleasure to take part in today's important debate. The end of the Second World War in Europe was a defining moment in the history of Wales and Ynys Môn. It brought an end to 6 years of conflict, where an estimated 300,000 Welshmen served in the military, with 15,000 killed. Ynys Môn may have been many miles away from the front line of the Blitz in the southeast of England. However, it was still targeted by bombing raids, including on the strategic port of Holyhead. The island played a vital part in the war effort. RAF fighter crews flew sorties from the island bases of Mona and Valley against Germany, while an airfield at Bodorgan was used as a storage space. These airfields were responsible for training and hosting thousands of services of people, with 1,378 men of the RAF and 408 officers and women of WAAF were based on RAF Mona by the end of the war. The legacy of the war can still be felt today. Valley remains a centre of military and civil aviation, with Mona now used as a relief landing ground. Valley is a source as highly skilled jobs and education for local people, with a partnership between Grŵp Llanrhichio and Babcock delivering apprenticeships to local young people, including aerospace engineering maintenance. On the home front, the impact was felt too. The island hosted evacuee children from Liverpool and Manchester, helping to keep children safe during the air attack from Germany. There were also over 40,000 Welsh people who could not speak English, especially in the western parts of Wales, such as Ynys Môn. To address this, the BBC did broadcast news of the war for around 20 minutes of every day in Welsh. Such programming would pave the way for S4C decades later. Rationing, of course, still impacted the everyday lives of the people of Ynys Môn for many years after the war's end. Those who sacrificed so much on both the home front and in the fields of conflict did so in the name of peace and order. The rule-based international order which emerged from the war is now under increasing strain. As we see a rise in far rights across the globe and leaders who disregard human rights and international law, we must be bold in confronting them. We have an obligation to honour the sacrifices of generation before us by upholding the legacy which they left us. I want to thank the organisers of the service I'll be attending on Mynydd Paris on VE Day to commemorate the contribution that Wales and Ynys Môn made in the war and in bringing about a more peaceful world. I would like to close my contribution to today's debate by affirming this message and to note how important it is that we honour those who fought and sacrificed so much for our freedom.
Daniel Francis.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and it's a privilege to speak in this debate to commemorate the 80th anniversary of VE Day. I'm proud to serve as a Member of Parliament for Bexley and Crayford and represent a constituency which is home to around 2,000 veterans. And my constituency's proximity to the Royal Arsenal in Woolwich, in the south-east corner of London, back in that day, the Royal Arsenal was home to one of the biggest munition factories in the UK, with 32,000 employees producing guns, shells, cartridges, cases and bombings. And therefore my constituency became a prime target for Nazi bombing. While many residents of the Bexley and Crayford constituency were fighting overseas, my constituency was really also playing its part to support the war effort, because in Crayford it was home to the Vickers factory, which again was producing machine guns, anti-aircraft predictors, naval gun laying equipment, fuses and the cases for the Barnes-Wallis bouncing bomb. And the Slade Green Heavy Anti-Aircraft Battery was built in the late 1930s and was the most easterly anti-aircraft site built inside the London Inner Artillery Zone. Today, the gun emplacements, fire command post, pillboxes and the air raid shelter are still standing. And after a successful local campaign in 2010, the site is now Grade 2 listed. Across the constituency, there are a number of war memorials, including the Garden of Remembrance in Oaklands Road, Bexley Heath, St Augustine's Church in Slade Green, St Paul's Church in Northumberland Heath and the Crayford War Memorial Garden. A window at St Paulinus Church, Crayford, commemorates 3 members of the Women's Voluntary Services who died in a V1 explosion in July 1944. In total, 66 people were killed and 184 properties were destroyed, with 7,000 damaged in the area around Crayford High Street. And I know across the constituency there were hundreds of more properties destroyed as a result of that Nazi bombing. I'd like to pay tribute to the East Wickham and Welling War Memorial Trust for the work they do to commemorate the war effort and the brave soldiers from Bexley and Crayford who served in the Second World War. Their area of benefit covers parts of my constituency, but also that of the Honourable Member for Old Bexley and Sidcup, and they carry out extensive work to ensure that there's been a memorial in place for local people who gave their lives, and they hold an incredibly moving service every November to remember them. I also want to mention the hard work and dedication of the 2 Royal British Legion branches of my constituency, the Bexley and Welling branch and the Crayford branch, and thank them for all the work they do to recognise the important contributions in the war effort. I look forward to joining them in attending a number of events in my constituency on Thursday to commemorate VE Day and to be able to pay my respects to those who made the ultimate sacrifice for us.
Charles.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's an honour to speak in this debate commemorating VE Day, and I know it's of great significance to many in my constituency of North Herefordshire, where we have a particularly significant proportion of the population who are veterans or from military families. The Royal British Legion has encouraged us to ensure that the stories of veterans are at the centre of our commemoration events this week. And so I would like to share with the House the story of my grandfather, James Patterson. He was a navigator serving on a Sterling bomber. And on the 16th of August 1943, his plane was shot down in southeast France. Only 2 of the crew of 7 survived. My grandfather was one of them. He was rescued by the resistance in the area of Amberieu, and he was saved by 3 families who hid him at great personal risk. Hid him in the town, hid him in the forests and the hills nearby, and eventually, 4 months later, he was smuggled out over the Pyrenees to safety. Without the bravery of those families, my mother would never have been born. I would not be here today. I want to pay a special tribute to Marius and Jeanne Lapierre, who hid him in their bakery. In 2014, my father's researches reconnected my family with the Lapierres, and we've since remained in contact. I was honoured to visit last year Monique Lapierre, who sadly since has died, who was one of the daughters of the family, and after whom my aunt is named. As we remember this week the bravery of all those, like my grandfather, who fought in the armed forces for freedom in Europe, let us also remember the bravery, often unsung, of those who fought, who resisted in so many different ways, like the Lapierres, at great personal risk to themselves and indeed their children, to save the lives of strangers. Let us all hope that we would do the same. And as we challenge the forces of the far right, as we recognise and remember the resistance of those 80 years ago who made the ultimate sacrifice to defend Europe against Nazism, let the memory of all those who showed such bravery never be forgotten.
Jazz Athwal.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm grateful for the opportunity to participate in such a significant debate as we celebrate the 80th anniversary of the Allied victory in Europe and the victory over Japan. Today we honour all the men and women who gave us the freedom we enjoy today, who fought against fascism for our freedom, our dignity and our liberation. Nearly a third of these men and women came from the Indian subcontinent, 2.5 million Hindus, Muslims and Sikhs, the largest volunteer army ever seen in history. One of those men was my grandfather, Nand Singh, who served in what was known as Malaya. Before him, my great-grandfather fought in Europe during the First World War. Although growing up, my parents recounted stories about the sacrifices my forebears made during both World Wars, I didn't see these contributions recognised elsewhere. Not in the history textbooks at school, not in the documentaries on TV, not in the films on the big screen. Although mentioned today, 2.5 million men simply airbrushed out of history. And despite a valiant effort to expose this history, it remains all too easy to surrender to the fear, to forget our historic unity, especially in flashpoints of racial or religious division. This VE Day, we must remain firm in our pursuit for the truth of our past, the forgotten stories of how Christians, Hindus, Jews, Muslims and Sikhs rallied together to achieve a common goal. Through paying tributes to these stories of unity, we can fight the lies that tell us our perceived differences define and divide us. The Second World War was bloody, brutal and barbaric, but within this violent context, there are glimmers of hope, stories of hope and unity, of togetherness instead of division, respect of our rituals over denigration, stories to drown out the nasty noise narrative we see online and on our streets that pit one religion against each other, judge us by our skin and dictate the respect we deserve based on religious identity. Stories to remind us that despite modern-day racial tensions, flashes of sectarian violence and religious hostilities, we can work together, we can stand united, and we do have a shared history. I pay tribute to those brave men and women whose resilience and fortitude built this country, whose shoulders we stand on and enjoy the freedoms we do today. Thank you.
Robbie Moore.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Victory in Europe Day is not only a time to celebrate, but a time to reflect and to remember. And I'm privileged to represent a community that does all three. Just recently, I met with two veterans of war, both 100 years young, and it was an honour to spend time with them, listening to their stories. Mr. Philip Jackson from Keighley drove one of the first wagons into Bergen-Belsen concentration camp in April 1945. Notorious for the location of the death of Anne Frank, her family and over 70,000 inmates in the cruelest and most unspeakable of conditions. The work of Mr. Jackson and his unit not only began the process of repatriation for the survivors, but provided us with record of that terrible place for the world to see. And I also met with Pam Ray from Ilkley. Mrs. Ray was a Wren radar mechanic, installing cutting-edge radar sets in ships on the Clyde, including HMS Vanguard. In fact, Mrs. Ray took part in the original VE Day celebrations and the parade in Glasgow 80 years ago. The groups working to remember the memory of that great nation, that great generation, and educate the young are strong in Keighley and Ilkley. Our cadet forces are a constant presence, flying the flag for our modern armed forces. And an organisation called Men of Worth have meticulously researched the lives of hundreds of men and women from the First and Second World Wars from Keighley and Ilkley, their stories and their legacies. And I want to thank Andy Wade and his team for their incredible work. Our very own Home Guard unit, WR28, are still going strong, Madam Deputy Speaker, and when I recently visited them, I was thoroughly impressed by the traditions that they are still keeping alive. And of course, even once the fighting is over, our armed forces continue to remember them. And that also continues with our fantastic Armed Forces and Veterans Breakfast Club, helping bring a vital social network to veterans and servicemen across the Ilkley area. Recently, Mark Scourge and the team held a sleep out, raising money and awareness for veterans in crisis. And Madam Deputy Speaker, across the whole of the Keighley and Ilkley constituency, we are incredibly proud of our veterans. So to conclude, Madam Deputy Speaker, I wish to make reference to the soldiers for whom 80 years ago this was not the end. Victory over Japan would take another gruelling 3 months to take place, and right up until the atomic bombs were dropped, it was widely feared that a full invasion of Japan was inevitable. So I would like to thank them for their service, their dedication and their commitment to our nation. And so I would like to wish all members of this House and my constituents a very happy VE Day, and I look forward to celebrating with them on VJ Day in August.
Speaker. Every anniversary commemorating the Allies' victories on VE Day and VJ Day is a significant one, and the triumph of liberal democracy over authoritarianism, nationalism and fascism is a lesson from history that we must never forget, and a sacrifice by so many courageous men and women that must always be remembered. This year is even more significant as we mark 80 years since the end of World War II, and because of this, by the grace of God, this could be the last significant anniversary that we may share with surviving veterans of the greatest generation, heroes, one and all. I extend my most profound gratitude to those heroes, Madam Deputy Speaker, in Newcastle and Lyme, across our United Kingdom and all parts of the then Empire, now Commonwealth of Nations. They fought so that we could have the privilege to live in the world we do today, one where we enjoy freedom and security, democracy and decency, respect and understanding. And Madam Deputy Speaker, our world will be a darker place when we lose the last of the greatest generation. Yesterday, back home in Newcastle and Lyme, our ancient and loyal borough, I had the great privilege of attending a VE Day party in the Westlands. It was a celebration to rival those held on the very first VE Day. Full of families, some had 3 generations present, much merriment, real gratitude, genuine loyalty, obvious patriotism and serious pride. And my thanks go to Kay, to Yvonne, Suzanne, Diane, and that's Diane with 2 N's, and Sarah for their organisational prowess and for bringing so many members of the community together. I'd also like to pay my small part in paying tribute and remembering those we lost during the war and those who've passed since. Fred Kite was a World War II veteran born in Newcastle and Lyme and who fought in North Africa, Normandy and Greece. He was the only Second World War British soldier to receive the military medal 3 times. His 3rd military medal was awarded for the, and I quote, greatest personal courage and his example of remaining in action against odds that were very much against him, a lesson for us all. I'd like to remember 2 Staffordshire-born Spitfire pilots, both born in my constituency, who flew as part of the photo reconnaissance unit. There are countless stories from not just the United Kingdom, the Commonwealth and the wider world. Normal people doing extraordinary things, all in the name of freedom. The Brampton Museum in our town centre has an exhibition looking at the contribution our community made to victory in Europe some 80 years ago. And you'll find some amazing stories about some amazing people. The spirit of togetherness and solidarity from the war formed the stories that my grandparents shared with me as a child, and they'll live with me forever. My grandfather came to this country from Jamaica in 1941 to serve king and country on his British passport. Many men like him came to roll up their sleeves and not just help defeat the Germans, but rebuild Britain too. And how lucky are we that they did. Without the blood, sweat and tears of men and women from across the Commonwealth, fighting on the beaches, in the air and on the mainland, we couldn't and we wouldn't have won the war. As we celebrate 80 years since the end of the most terrible global war in modern history...
Order. Order. Monica Harding.
Thank you, Madam
Madam Deputy Speaker, on this 80th anniversary of VE Day, I want to pay tribute to those brave men and women who played their part from my constituency of Esher and Walton. Their names are etched on memorials throughout my constituency. All Saints Church in Weston Green, Esher, has undertaken the invaluable project of recording the stories of some of the fallen on their memorial. Soldiers who fell in Italy, North Africa and the Far East, sailors lost in the Atlantic and Mediterranean, pilots lost over Norway and Egypt. And we are privileged to have veterans who are still with us. Wilbur Holver, my constituent, celebrated his 100th birthday last month. Born in America, he served as a marine engineer clearing mines to assure the safe passage of Allied ships outside Le Havre and Antwerp, which became essential entry points for Allied supplies. Wilbur told me he celebrated VE Day in 3 countries. The first in Holland, where he celebrated with the British troops, the biggest party I've ever been in. And it was still going when he left and returned 5 days later, and that the party lasted a month or more. He then returned to France and partied some more before ending up in London on leave, where he found himself in front of Buckingham Palace still partying. He came to live in England in Esher, and we are lucky to have him. Our local area was suffered during the Blitz. It was once described as Doodlebug Alley on account of the many German V1s passing overhead. In June 1944, a V1 fell on Imber Court in Esher, the Met Police training ground, killing 20 men of the Welsh Guards Training Battalion, competing that day in their regimental sports competition. On the home front, Sir Bruce White, who lived in Hersham, was instrumental in the design of the floating Mulberry Harbours, and the people of Esher and Walton played their part as part of units like Walton Sparrows, which formed a vital anti-aircraft battery. The Women's Land Army operated at Rivernook Farm in Walton and Bell Farm, and NAFI moved its headquarters to Claygate in my constituency. Over 150 local women worked provisioning millions of men through the canteens and bars scattered across the globe, which oversaw 7,000 canteens, and its facilities served more than 3.5 million cups of tea every day. And when the war finally ended, Oatlands Park Hotel, still going, played host to the official celebrations with cabaret and hundreds of guests. Commemorating 80 years since victory in Europe, we owe a profound debt to those who made and make sacrifices, even final sacrifices, to bring about a better, gentler world. We must never lose sight of the profound blessing and fragility of peace and how hard it was won.
Julian Jones.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Last Friday, I visited Kilmarnock Football Club to witness the signing of the Armed Forces Covenant next to their award-winning Memorial Garden. It was both a pleasure and an honour to see the club's continued commitment to our veterans and their acknowledgement of those who lost their lives in the service of our country. The timing was perfect, as in this most important of weeks we celebrate the 80th anniversary of Victory in Europe, VE Day, and we remember those who made the ultimate sacrifice to defeat Hitler's Nazis. This is also one of our last opportunities to pay tribute to living Second World War veterans who served and sacrificed to defend our way of life. The Scottish contribution to the events leading up to VE Day on 8th of May 1945 were truly significant, encompassing military service, industrial output and civilian support. Scotland, though small in size, played a disproportionately large role in Britain's war effort during World War II. The war generation are true heroes and the backbone upon which this country was built. I want to tell the House more about the contribution Kilmarnock Football Club made to the war effort. Their ground, Rugby Park, was requisitioned by the government on the 4th of June 1940, and a few days later the troops marched in and took over the ground to be used as an oil and fuel depot. In July of that year, the club gave an interest-free loan to the British government of £1,000 for the war effort, which might not sound significant today, but put into context, 80 years ago, it would have taken an average worker 5 years to earn that amount. On my visit, it was wonderful to be able to see the original documentation from the then Chancellor of the Exchequer, Sir Kingsley Wood, which remains a treasured piece of the club's history. At this time, when every part of our nation united, Scotland, England, Wales and Northern Ireland pulling together in a time of need, Kilmarnock Football Club was no exception and made its contribution. Many players stepped up and did their duty in the name of service to our nation. Sadly, 8 of them paid the ultimate price and never returned home. I want to remember them, not only in this debate, but always, and maybe never forget, their sacrifice. When the war came to its conclusion, the club reclaimed their ground and their generous loan was repaid in full, albeit interest-free. After the events of wartime, and with the efforts of Italian and German prisoners of war, Rugby Park was rebuilt with football returning in April 1945. VA Day was as much a moment of pride and relief for Kilmarnock as for any part of the UK, marking the culmination of years of sacrifice and determination. The lessons of the Second World War and the global security challenges we face today reinforce the need to face our adversaries together through the strength of our alliances like NATO. And learning the lessons of history is a meaningful way we can pay tribute and honour the sacrifices made by so many veterans who fought for our...
Order.
Madam Deputy Speaker, one of the most moving accounts this week that I read was that of 101-year-old Ruth Clabert, a Jewish refugee, a mechanic on the Lancaster bombers. She spoke not of celebration, but of sacrifice. When asked for her opinion on yesterday's celebrations, she said, well, yes, we won the war. It's good to celebrate that we won the war and what that means for democracy. But for me, when I think of VE Day, I think of the pilot with whom I fell in love, the only man I ever loved, and he flew many successful missions, but his last was his last. He never came home. For me, I think of the cost of war. War is not something you celebrate, it's something you remember. It is something that you look back on and reflect on how it was a failure of man. It was a failure to reach an outcome that didn't involve hundreds of thousands of young men being killed. She went on, we must never stop always working to ensure we don't end up in the scenario again where more people are slaughtered. And that means you must always have to stand up for democracy. Those words should weigh heavy on all our shoulders in this significant week. I want to take this opportunity as well to commend the community across my constituency of Upper Bann, whose efforts have been immense in this significant week. Across our towns and villages and housing estates, the atmosphere is one of pride and remembrance. Lampposts and walls are proudly decorated with our national flag, banners and bunting, all part of a collective effort to both celebrate and commemorate the great Allied victory. There is no greater source of pride than seeing our communities come together, not only to mark this historic triumph, but to remember those who secured the civil and religious liberties that we enjoy today. I am free to hold and express my views because of the bravery, the willingness to serve, and the ultimate sacrifice made by those who stood against fascism, tyranny, genocide and racism, aggression and suppression. And I want to note the exemplary effort of Upper Bann. Portadown in particular was a key industrial centre, playing a significant role through its engineering, textile and transport industries. Lurgan played a critical role. Brownlow House, a grand 19th century building that I've spoken of, and I thank the Minister for her visit, was the headquarters for the US States Army. General Eisenhower visited himself. The D-Day landings were planned from Brownlow House. Banbridge was not found wanting. It was central to the agricultural supply chain when they participated in the dig for victory. Young men from Banbridge served with distinction on our armed forces. This is only the tip of the iceberg on how Northern Ireland contributed to the overall victory. Northern Ireland stepped up. And I want it clearly noted in this House today how thankful we are for the united effort from every corner of our
Natasha Ryans.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The 80th anniversary of VE and VEJ Day is a time for us to remember and honour those that fought to defend our freedoms, our values and our people. This is also a time to recognise the contribution that veterans across our country continue to make to their communities. Because for many of our veterans, their service to this country and their commitment to fighting for our values does not end when they leave the military. And I'd like to take this opportunity to tell the House about one such veteran from my community, Mike Lyons. I didn't know Mike for very long, but one of the privileges we have in this place is that we get to meet people who you meet and you just instinctively know that they are the best of us, and that was just what Mike was. Mike served in the military for 7 years and was a member of the Royal British Legion New Addington branch for more than 30 years. But for many years, Mike also ran the final roll call campaign to ensure that World War I soldiers who returned from fighting and were institutionalised due to what we now know as PTSD were properly honoured and given their rightful place in history. His campaign led to 26 servicemen being buried, who were buried in unmarked graves without a military burial, finally being given the dignified memorials they deserved. Mike wanted to ensure that their memories lived on, and just before Christmas asked me to light a candle for them in Parliament. But our candle of remembrance in Parliament quickly turned into a full-on candle lighting ceremony at the tomb of the unknown warrior in Westminster Abbey. At one point, someone questioned whether or not we needed insurance through the bugler. Sadly, Mike passed away before our ceremony could take place, but with the support of his family and friends, we held our ceremony as planned. So in March, it was a privilege to welcome Mike's family, his friends, his local councillors, community leaders from the Family Centre and Pathfinders in New Addington, members of the Royal British Legion, Army cadets, members of the Croydon's veteran community, the Minister for Veterans and the member for Birmingham Solihull, flag bearers and a bugler to Westminster Abbey for our candle ceremony. I hope that we did Mike proud. As we look ahead to the 80th anniversary of VE and VJ Day, we must commit ourselves to ensuring our armed forces community is looked after now and in the future. So I welcome this government's announcement of a UK-wide support system for our veterans, and in Croydon we have launched the Croydon Cares for Veterans campaign to raise funds for Safford Croydon and the New Addington branch of the Royal British Legion. Because as it was for the Second World War generation, and as it was for Mike, it is our actions that demonstrate our commitment to the people that serve this country. It is our actions that will protect our values, and it is our actions that will honour what it is our armed forces community continue to fight for today. Thank you.
Jim Shannon.
Madam Deputy Speaker, it is great that this House is commemorating the historic victory which marked the end of the war, which has taken so much. In a time when we are often being asked to apologise for so much, it's important to recognise the victory that we had in the name of democracy and freedom throughout this world. Members will be aware, and it's good to see the Minister has placed a debate in this chamber regarding the heroism of Newton man Blair Paddy Main and the award of a posthumous VC which he so richly deserves. I was amazed by the number of people who didn't quite understand until they watched the TV drama Rogue Heroes how integral Blair and indeed the Northern Ireland soldiers were to the war effort. It has to be remembered we had no conscription in Northern Ireland, didn't need it. Every single man that was there did so out of love for King Country and the principle of freedom. This is still the case today for serving Armed Forces personnel who proudly serve King and Country from Northern Ireland, who have given their all during the Troubles. However, what the debate regarding Blair Main has highlighted to me today is that whilst as a youngster I was taught about the essential action of Northern Ireland and her men and women in the war effort in the UK to secure victory over the Nazis and over Japan in Asia. My constituency of Strangford has given much in their lives with war memorials in Ards and the Ards Peninsula and Cumber, Killilea and Ballinhinch. Hundreds of young men and indeed some women gave their all for King and Country at that time. Northern Ireland contributed significantly to the war production. Sometimes need to be remembered about that as well, whether it be the weaponry, the munitions, the aircraft, the tanks, the ships and small arms. They were all built in Northern Ireland. Also the opportunities came for women. The RUC, the Royal Ulster Constabulary, for example, recruited female police, though they were subject to a marriage bar. Similarly, there was employment for women in the auxiliary services for the armed forces and an additional agricultural labour and engineering. Some 250 women were employed, and by 1943 some 12,500 women were employed in Northern Ireland. For this reason, those from both sides of the community in Northern Ireland, both from Roman Catholic, and from Protestant and from Nationalists and Unionists, who will be celebrating with a full heart and with family stories and memories handed down through the generations. Some 44,000, I think it was, served in uniform. Of some of those, 10% did not come back. The Belfast Blitz separately saw 1,000 people lose their lives and acknowledged the importance of the Northern Ireland war effort. I attended a memorial to the young RAF and Army men who were killed also in the Blitz in Newton Ards just some time ago. The role of Northern Ireland in the victory for the Allies cannot be overstated, and I'm proud as Strangford MP to not simply lay a wreath in their memory each year, but to raise my hand and salute to those armed forces, those labourers, those engineers, those women who filled the gaps and who lost their lives in the Blitz. We salute them all again today and honour their sacrifice, and the best we can honour them is to recreate that British spirit in our children and our grandchildren and remind them of the cost we all hold so dearly. We will remember them, and on the 8th of May we will celebrate them in communities through the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland.
Luke Charters.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In York House, we'll be celebrating VE Day and the peace we cherish today as a result of the tenacity of the wartime generation. And may I take just a moment to set the scene of what VE Day was like in York. After nearly 6 long years of war, the city burst into life with spontaneous celebration. And for the first time since 1939, York Minster was lit up, its great bells ringing out across the city. And there's even a recording on YouTube of the Minster's bells from that day, with a comment that the bell ringers, like the rest of the nation, might have been a little out of practice. But on VE Day, they rang out with a sound of triumph and relief. It was truly a suburban tapestry of victory, though, in York. Canadian service personnel were seen dancing in Fulford, driving about York on their motorbikes, and bonfires were lit across the city, including throughout the many communities that make up my constituency. And one particularly memorable bonfire stood in Bishopthorpe, on the very site where the wonderful Bishopthorpe Junior School now stands, a symbol then and now of hope for the next generation. And Madam Deputy Speaker, I wrote to all of the fantastic primary schools in my constituency, tasking our talented pupils to draw a York Street party celebrating VE Day. And Madam Deputy Speaker, one of those drawings is on their way to you. Yeah. The winning school is Elvington Church of England Primary School, who is just a stone's throw away from RAF Elvington, where French pilots flew alongside British pilots for the last years of the war. And I'll be writing to the lucky people to congratulate them soon. York played a huge role in the Second World War. It continues to do so today. And we're home to the Queen Elizabeth Barracks at Strensall, home to the HQ of the 2nd Medical Brigade, and to many inspirational serving personnel and their families who serve our country. And I'm truly privileged to have them in my constituency. We also have Yorkshire Air Museum in Elvington, who make a huge contribution to the local area. And this week, it will be hosting a We'll Meet Again weekend to celebrate VE Day and take residents back to the 1940s. And finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, I must say that York was truly magical in its contributions to the war effort. It really contributed to the profound victory we had in Europe, and I pay tribute to the families that played their part.
Trina Murray.
Speaker, and it's a real privilege to be able to contribute to this debate today. It's right that we take the time to pause and reflect about the sacrifices that the great generation have made. Not only the generation that fought in the war that are mostly no longer with us, but even those who remember the war as a child are getting smaller and smaller by the day. My mum often talks about her earliest memory being the party and my grandparents dressed up. It was only later she realised what it was. As the Honourable Member for Angus and Perthshire Glens reminded us about why often that generation didn't talk about what they had experienced and the difficulties of what they had shared. Before the new town of Cumbernauld was created, the people of the villages that made up my constituency were miners, were weavers and farm workers. They all played a massive part in fuelling the nation, feeding the nation and contributing to what we now refer to as the defence industries. People that we don't remember every year on Remembrance Sunday, but it's important to pay tribute to their work today because they were as big a part of the war effort as those who fought in the armed services. My family were those essential workers. My grandfather, Sam Laidlaw, an engineer in a paper mill which had been repurposed for essential war work. My other granddad, John Murray, a dairyman whose farm hands were women from the Land Army and the prisoners of war brought in daily from a camp up the road. My great-aunt, Helen Murray, a nurse in Clydebank during the 2 days of the Blitz. None of them ever talked about it. I also recognise that representing a new town, it's very difficult to look at the War Memorial and to not think of the town as it is today, the 7th biggest in Scotland, but actually to think of it as the village it once was. Those names So familiar, those names so similar. A full generation of a village wiped out, and it would be the same across this nation. I'm glad we've been able to pay time today to pay tribute to all of those, whatever role they played, whether it was in the armed forces, in the mills, the farms, the mines. We thank you.
Julian.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm always humbled by the history of this chamber, but more so than ever today. It was a government of national unity that steered the United Kingdom through the Second World War. And the names of Churchill, Attlee, Eden, Bevin and Sinclair all deserve to echo through history. Conservative, Liberal and Labour MPs united in service to defend our nation, our allies and our values in the struggle against tyranny. And as we commemorate VE Day 80 years on, I begin with a tribute to our political leaders of the time, because it was not inevitable that history would take the course that it did. Because in the early summer of 1940, there were some voices calling on us to make peace with Hitler.
Will my honourable friend give way?
I will.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. He talks about commemoration. On that point, West Horton's branch of the Royal British Legion was one of the very first of its kind in the country, set up in 1921, after 109 soldiers from the town died in the First World War. With that in mind, will he congratulate the Royal British Legion branch in West Horton for the excellent VE commemoration event that was hosted on the weekend?
Thank you. I will happily congratulate the branch of the Royal British Legion in his constituency and those all across the country that are doing such valuable work. Madam Deputy Speaker, there were some, after the fall of France, saying that despite the heroism at Dunkirk, our military was on the back foot. And to use a modern phrase, a small number advocating for talks with Germany might even have suggested that we didn't have many cards to play. Thank goodness that their advice at that time was so emphatically rejected. The decision to stand against Hitler's Germany in 1940 was not just born out of self-preservation, it was so much more. It was the decision of a free and proud country saying that aggressors cannot be rewarded, that a hateful ideology must be opposed, and that our allies are worth fighting for. Those are timeless lessons. The greatest debt we all owe is to the brave men and women who served and sacrificed so much during the worst conflict that humanity has ever known. And in my constituency, Hatfield is rightly famous for being the birthplace of the Geoffrey de Havilland mosquito fighter bomber, one of the RAF's most effective weapons against the Luftwaffe, an example of the ingenuity that was so crucial to the war effort. Known as the Wooden Wonder, more than 6,500 mosquitoes were delivered to Allied forces over the course of the conflict, and it's believed that more than 3,000 were built on site in Hatfield. The neighbours in Welwyn Garden City had an integral role to play as well. A few miles north and east of Hatfield, Panzanger Aerodrome started out in 1940 as a decoy factory, luring the Luftwaffe bombers away from Hatfield Aerodrome. After victory in the Battle of Britain, and with the threat of bombing raids easing, the aerodrome officially became RAF Panzanger in 1943 and operated as an important flying school. Welwyn Garden City was also a sanctuary for Jewish people fleeing the evil of Nazi tyranny, with civilians welcomed from 1933 onwards, an Applecroft hostel established on the west side of town. Thanks to the records of the Welwyn Garden City Interfaith Group, we know the story of Sam Otto, a 21-year-old Jewish man who escaped the Nazis in Leipzig, travelled bravely across Europe, and was welcomed into the hostel in 1939. He said on his arrival, if the hostel wasn't heaven, it must be next door to it. Today, Welwyn Garden City is home to a thriving Ukrainian population as our community once again opens its arms to those in greatest need. As we commemorate VE and VJ Day, I feel exceptionally fortunate to stand in a Commons chamber where our political predecessors had the resolve to stand united against Nazi tyranny. And I'm equally proud to represent Welwyn Hatfield, to recognise some of the contributions made to the war effort, and to simply say thank you for everyone who fought for freedom.
Yeah. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And as we reflect on this historic moment, the 80th anniversary of VE Day, we remember the significant contributions across our communities and our country and our Commonwealth. And we've heard some very moving, powerful contributions today in this debate from across the chamber. My own part of the country, Colchester, played a pivotal part in the Second World War. Our residents served on the front line and on the home front. Our industries stepped up. Our rivers and coastline were fortified as part of the Eastern Command Line. Many of those fortifications can still be seen in our Castle Park and along the River Colne. And they're just many examples of the many I could give of the resilience and determination of the people of Colchester during those dark times. The presence of armed forces in our community today, and veterans of course, is a testament to our enduring commitment to national security and our readiness to respond to crises both at home and abroad. Now, Colchester is of course marking VE Day and our military history in many ways this week and over many months. This weekend I unveiled a new blue plaque at the main gated entrance to the former cavalry barracks, which played such a vital part in the First World War, where it trained and treated England's war horses. The historic guardhouse at that site has been restored and is a reminder of the centuries-long association of the military in Colchester. And on Thursday, at Colchester Town Hall, we will raise the VE Day flag and the Pegasus flag, which is the flag of the airborne forces who did so much to help us achieve victory. We will also gather at Colchester's War Memorial with service personnel from 16 Air Assault Brigade, and I will later join the Nepalese community remembering the Gurkha soldiers who contributed so much and continue to make so many sacrifices in the fight for peace today. Yeah. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, as we honour the sacrifices made by those who fought for our freedom 80 years ago, let us also acknowledge the ongoing contributions made by our present armed forces. Their commitment to protecting our nation and upholding the values we hold dear is as vital today as it was during the Second World War, and we renew our commitment to them. And as we heard earlier today in an earlier business in this House, we must also renew our commitment to ending conflicts around the world, from Ukraine to the Middle East.
John Pearce.
Madam Deputy Speaker, as we mark 80 years since the long-anticipated news that the evil Nazi regime that had orchestrated the greatest act of mass murder in human history and terrorised Europe had been defeated by the Allies, I want to concentrate on my constituency, High Peak's role in the Second World War. So many of our men and women served their country during the war, and sadly, far too many made the ultimate sacrifice in defeating fascism. Whilst our communities were spared much of the horrendous bombing that affected larger areas like London, there were some notable exceptions. It was one July evening in 1942 when the Luftwaffe found themselves flying over High Peak. After failing to find a large propeller factory in Lostock because of low cloud cover, the high-speed bombers wreaked havoc on two High Peak villages, one dropping its bombs on Tor Vale and the other dropping two bombs near Swizzle's sweet factory. Had those bombs landed, then the world may never have known love hearts, and the many childhood would have been the poorer for it. The good news is that Swizzles is surviving and thriving today. Skipping ahead to 1943, more planes were flying over the High Peak, but this time it was the 617 Squadron of the RAF practicing low-level flying needed for Operation Chastise, more commonly known as the Dam Busters. The Dam Busters were vital in convincing people that the Allies were winning the war against Nazism, and it was the rolling hills of the High Peak that helped the brave RAF personnel to pull it off. In this time of celebration and reflection, we naturally remember the strength and bravery of the people who fought to keep our country free during the Second World War, and we must never lose sight of the scale of the sacrifice that people make when they join our armed forces today. My own uncle served in the Second World War, Ronald Pearce. He fought bravely on the Italian campaign. He survived, but the war took its toll on him during a time when there was little understood and little done for those suffering from trauma and mental health issues. That is why I warmly welcome this government's announcement of VALA, the UK-wide Veteran Support Service, which will work with health, employment and housing charities, and is backed by one of the largest ever government funding commitments for veterans. As we celebrate the incredible achievements of the greatest generation, we cannot hide from the fact that we live today in an increasingly unstable world, with anti-Semitism once again on the rise and a war on European soil because of a tyrant's invasion of a neighbouring country. May our generation have all the fortitude and resilience of the generation we celebrate today.
MacDonald.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. On Victory in Europe Day in 1945, it was a moment of national rejoicing, but it was also the moment when Britain and the world started to count the cost of war, the human catastrophe of totalitarianism. Yet you'd be hard-pressed to find anyone in the country who would say the price was too high, and I think we've heard that today in the moving recitations from the member from New Forest East and Upper Bann. That greatest generation fought for our country and for freedom, but they fought for British values of democracy and the rule of law. In 1941, it is estimated that there were only 11 functioning democracies in the world, and half of these could trace their genesis back to this mother of parliaments. It's no exaggeration to say that democracy is Britain's greatest gift to the world, and it's our duty to defend that gift, both at home and abroad. It's why I was pleased to see soldiers from Ukraine marching in the VE Day parade this week. Our war leaders in 1945 knew that winning the war was only the first step in winning the peace. They started immediately to set up a series of international organisations, the United Nations, the European Council, NATO, the European Coal and Steel Community, and together they protected democracy, freedom and human rights for the last 80 years. The spread of democracy across the globe has been a great success, but we mustn't be complacent. Threats to our democracy are real, and not all come from hostile nations. Some arise from conditions in our own country. Our society faces great challenges, with yawning inequality greater than at any time since the 1930s, when similar circumstances saw fascism sweep across Europe. This is not a time for hands-off government, it's a time for intervention. Just as in the aftermath of the Second World War, the Attlee government promised good jobs, high-quality homes, universal healthcare and educational opportunity of all, so the mission for this government is to deliver that commitment anew to the British people. On this 80th anniversary of VE Day, we have so much to be proud of and thankful for as a nation, and in this I'm in complete concordance with the member for Ayrshire and Perthshire Glens, in that we need to take heed to protect, preserve and defend that precious gift of democracy, won at such great cost and selflessly bequeathed to us by the wartime generation. And I thought I'd leave my final words to Churchill himself, who, in his address to Parliament on the 8th of May 1945, added a coda that wasn't included in his broadcast. He'd actually said these words initially to the media, so I do hope he got permission from the Speaker at the time before coming to the House. He said, "The strength of this parliamentary institution has been shown to enable it at the same time to wage war and preserve all the title deeds of democracy."
Thank you. This week, events are being held across Bishop Auckland constituency celebrating 80 years of peace in Europe, which followed a war so terrible that we still mark the years since. I vividly remember celebrating the 50th VE Day 30 years ago in my last year at primary school. I remember dressing up as an evacuee, singing Vera Ling songs and colouring in a Union Jack to be hung as bunting. Back then, some of that resilient war generation was still sprightly enough to kick a football, or at least to sit and share their memories with us. But with each passing year, age has wearied them, and fewer are still with us. So weeks like this are important, lest we ever forget that generation who stood firm against tyranny and crossed land, sea and sky to secure the freedoms we enjoy today. Bishop Auckland played its role, sending young men off to war, caring for evacuees and digging for victory. Victory in Europe cost the best blood of the 20th century. And those who survived not only won the war, but went on to win the peace and build modern Britain, including the welfare state and the National Health Service. We owe that generation a debt we will never be able to repay. My granddad was just 19 when, with the 12th Yorkshire Battalion, he parachuted into Ronville in the early hours of D-Day and later into Arnhem during Operation Market Garden. He never really spoke of what he saw until the final months of his life, but he carried it with him quietly. My dad recalls a time they sat to watch the film The Longest Day. In a scene when one of the officers shouts, "Come on, men," Grandad walked across the room, turned off the telly and said they weren't men, they were boys. But home from war he came, raised 2 sons, for many years as a single father, and did his part to build a better world. He'd have been amazed to have a grandson serving in this place. The victory won in Europe 80 years ago this week was not a victory for Britain and France over Germany, but of liberal democracy over fascism and racism. It was a victory for the whole of Europe. Europe is the best example of lasting peace and reconciliation the world has ever seen. May we always see ourselves as friends and allies and never surrender to those who want to divide us. Across the world, in Ukraine, Gaza, Sudan and beyond, we see conflict once again robbing children of their homes and families of their future. And here in Europe, Russia's invasion of Ukraine has shattered assumptions that peace on our continent was secure. It is not. It must be defended. Peace must be defended, not only with arms, but with unity across Europe, with moral clarity and with political courage to stand up for international law and human rights. Remembrance is not nostalgia, it is responsibility. If we're to honour a generation that fought for us, we must fight in our time for the peace that they gave us.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Born in 1958, my childhood was surrounded by people who'd fought in World War II, but as a child, it all seemed so long ago. My father was an RAF doctor serving in the Middle East and in East Anglia, and the fatality rate of the air crews was quite appalling, not least because of all those killed as the planes crashed. I remember stories my dad told us of crawling into stricken planes to extract wounded pilots. Like many who fought in the war, he spoke about it only in his greatest old age. But now that I have grandchildren of my own, it no longer seems so long ago. What tricks time and memory play on all of us. Suffolk was in the front line defending our country. Our airfields were key to the liberation of Europe. The brave men of the United States Air Force flew bombing raids from Ruffin deep into Europe. And the incredible fighter ace and double amputee, Wing Commander Douglas Bader, flew from RAF Honington. Vanishingly few of this generation are among us now, but I was delighted to send my congratulations to one of them, Jim Grant from Stowmarket, on his 100th birthday last year. Jim signed up to the Royal Marines 1943, served until 1946, present at D-Day, firing for the troops at Sword, Juno and Gold Beaches, and I salute his service. We must also never forget the thousands of extraordinary, ordinary citizens who made this contribution to the People's War for Freedom. In Suffolk, we received thousands of volunteers for the Women's Land Army. From all over the country to milk cows, pull potatoes, drive tractors. They were determined and indomitable, and alongside the Home Guard and the ARP wardens, made a huge contribution to our victory. Now, many in this House will find it quite unbelievable that war has returned to Europe. As we speak, rockets and drones are being flung at cities and civilians hide in air raid shelters. Those who start wars do not respect the lessons of history, which, as the great songwriter said, are simply blowing in the wind. They must not be allowed to win. I therefore welcome the government's choice to increase defence spending and applaud the commitment to go further. 2.5% is really not enough. 80 years ago, Mr. Churchill addressed the Commons from the other place, this chamber having been hollowed out by a direct bomb strike. He reminded us that Britons were the first to draw the sword against tyranny. We cannot forget that. It has now fallen to us to safeguard the peace which his generation won, and we must put aside our political differences.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. 80 years ago, celebrations broke out across the country that were spontaneous and joyful and often very noisy. But there was a group of people who really weren't talking loudly about the work that they'd done during the war. And there's a group of those people that were based in Leighton Buzzard, in a place called Kew Central. It was a secret communications hub, and at its height, there were over 2,000 people working there, predominantly women, running what was the largest telephone exchange in the entire world. And there are many people in the constituency and further afield as well who think that this is a contribution that more people need to find out about. Lots of people know about the neighbouring secret work at Bletchley, but Leighton Buzzard's contribution has, I think, for too long not been recognised. So I'm really proud of the work of a local historian called Paul Brown, who's been bringing that secret work to the public attention. And I'm also proud that this Thursday I will be able to go along to Leighton Buzzard. Oh yes, I will give way, yep.
I thank the Honourable Lady for her remarkable speech, remembering those that contributed to our war effort. Will she join me in remembering all those who fought and fell from across my Penistone and Stocksbridge constituency in World War II, but in particular those who were working at Samuel Fox's steelworks in Stocksbridge to make munitions and equipment in order to enable we had a successful outcome to the war. Thank you.
The Honourable Lady for her contribution, and absolutely think that everyone's contributions to the war effort were really vital to ensure that we won victory and peace. So, as I was saying, this Thursday I will be at Leighton Buzzard War Memorial with local people, laying a wreath in memory of those people who served at Kew Central, because I really think it's vital that we make sure that those people whose wartime service was carried out in the shadows is now brought into the light.
Lizzie Collins.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As I reflect on VE Day and the celebration of victory over fascism in Europe, the thing that strikes me is that the war effort was one of common endeavour by ordinary people. Ordinary people like my granddad, who was a translator at Bletchley Park. Ordinary people like Richard Brock, who, when I met him last year, was 100 years young. Richard was one of the men who liberated Belsenbergen concentration camp. To sit with someone who had known that horror firsthand truly was a privilege, and it really was a privilege to pass on my personal thanks from a survivor's family. My friend Krish had a Polish grandma. She survived Belsen. After her liberation, she came to Britain and she settled here, and as the rest, as they say, is history. Except it's not just history, is it? It's not something that we can bring out to look at on special occasions and congratulate ourselves on beating fascism before putting it away for the next anniversary. Because it didn't start with the camps, did it? It never does. No, it was more insidious than that. It was a slow and constant poisoning of minds by people intent only on power. It was a setting up of different groups as scapegoats. It was the use of pseudoscience to back up an ideology of racism and eugenics. It was the use of propaganda to turn people into caricatures. The use of the press to create a narrative of blame. It was the turning of ordinary people on their neighbours. It was the taking of the propensity of humans to group together and turning it into a sinister tribalism. Because why look to the difficult solutions to complex problems when you can simply blame that group over there? The groups that many people have been taught over many years to fear and to hate. In the 20s and 30s, it was the Jews, the gypsies, the gays, the disabled. It was the intellectuals and the trade unionists. It was anyone who challenged that narrative of hate. So who is it today? Because fascism didn't start with the camps. And the ideas underpinning fascism are not artefacts of history. So I end, Madam Deputy Speaker, with a plea that we do not treat fascism and tyranny as an historical artefact, that we remember they are a living possibility, even now, even here. The overthrow of fascism isn't a bauble to admire once a year. Rather, it's a reminder that we should never let it get that far ever again, that we must be on our guard and we should never let it flourish.
Luke Myers.
Today, we remember the extraordinary courage, sacrifice and service that brought about victory in Europe 80 years ago. And it has been a privilege to join VE Day commemorations right across my constituency this week. I'm proud of our community for organising so many events to honour that brave generation. In our towns and villages, we remember all those who answered that call of service, many of whom would never return. We think of servicemen like Stan Hollis, a local lad from Middlesbrough, who earned the only Victoria Cross awarded on D-Day for his sheer bravery in Normandy. We remember servicemen like Harry Tout, future Mayor of Guisborough, who fought in North Africa and up the spine of Italy. And we remember the airmen, the mariners, the Green Howards and all others who laid down their lives for freedom. We also pay tribute to those who played their part on the home front, from the land girls in our North Yorkshire countryside to the women and men of steel, the shipbuilders and steel workers who kept the country afloat. It made Teesside a target, and Teesside was one of the first places in Britain to suffer casualties in the Blitz. But the industrial haze also clouded enemy targeting, the smog protecting the smoggies. That generation's courage made peace possible. Their service shaped the world we inherited, and their patriotism was unwavering. We honour them today, not only in words, but also as a society how we stand together for each other and stand up to fear and hatred wherever it rears its head. As we remember them, we rededicate ourselves to the values they fought for: democracy, peace and fairness.
Christine Sullivan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. On Thursday, 6th of March this year, I attended a very poignant evening of commemoration in the Bathgate Regal Theatre. I believe it was the first 80th anniversary of VE Day event in the UK, and it was a very fitting tribute to our local heroes. Now, it was a very emotional evening right from the get-go when the Whitburn Band kicked off with Glenn Miller. You see, my papa, John Sullivan, was a pianist in a big band. He was also a plumber from a small village north of Glasgow who was plucked from that village and sent to serve with the RAF in Burma. Thousands of miles from his home, when he probably never left the UK, might not even have left Scotland before, not knowing when or if he would return home. But he did return home, and for that I'm here today. My mind also turned to mother-grandfather Jimmy Campbell, who served as a miner all his days, again making an essential contribution to the war in a dangerous role, like so many others in those days. For example, the Linlithgow munitionettes, the women who worked in the Nobel munitions factory, exposed to hazardous toxins day in, day out. And on the 5th of February 1943, 4 of those women went to work and never returned home due to an explosion. Thanks to the work of a local historian, Catherine Welch, a light has been shone on the Linlithgow women once again, and efforts are underway to remember their service. And these examples speak to the service of a generation, ordinary people who did extraordinary things in the name of service and democracy. We owe them a debt of gratitude we cannot repay, but we must honour their legacy by standing united and resolute in the defence of democracy today.
Cooperation of colleagues, we did get everybody in. Now I'll come to the front bench and the Shadow Secretary of State, James Cotton.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It is a pleasure and privilege to wind up such an excellent debate, and I pay tribute to all the contributions we've heard today as we in Parliament follow the public yesterday in taking our turn to mark the 80th anniversary of VE Day, one of the most momentous days in our country's history. VE Day was the triumph of freedom over tyranny in Europe. We must be forever grateful to all those who served to deliver that victory, not least as the great poignancy of this year's anniversary has come from the fading of our living link to those who were actually there at the time. But that link still remains, and it was a particularly powerful moment yesterday at the start of VE Day proceedings in Parliament Square when World War II RAF veteran Alan Kennett, turning 101 later this month, formally gave the military procession its send-off, holding the torch of peace. That living link, often through family, really matters. My right honourable friend from Rayleigh and Wickford cannot be here today, but I know how much his lifelong passion for armed forces stems from his father's service with the Royal Navy on D-Day. And through most of my life, I had a reminder of the war every single day because my late mother was called Faith, precisely because she was born in 1941, when our eventual victory was far from certain. Although my mother regarded herself as English, she was born in Haverfordwest in Wales because her dad, my late grandfather, was a civil engineer who in wartime switched from building railways to running a naval munitions factory at Tracoon in Wales. So maybe I have defence procurement in the blood, who knows. Of course, as many have stressed, it's important to remember that the war did not finish on VE Day, and that 80 years ago, some of the most bitter fighting would still come in the Pacific Theatre. And so I join my honourable friend for Keighley and Ilkley in looking forward to celebrating VJ Day in August. Now, there are many fine speeches, Madam Deputy Speaker. A particular theme was the contribution of so many nations fighting alongside us under our command. The Honourable Lady for Upper Bann, of course, stressed the role of every part of the Union, particularly strong from Northern Ireland. The Honourable Gentleman for Newcastle under Lyme and Cheltenham stressed the role of the Commonwealth, and the Honourable Gentleman for Ilford South specifically the role of the Indian Armed Forces, ironic given what is happening as we speak in terms of India and Pakistan. And of course, they fought so bravely in World War II at Monte Cassino in particular. The Honourable members for Coatbridge and Bellshill and Cowdenbeath and Kirkcaldy stressed the presence of Polish forces in their constituencies, including those who were involved at Market Garden in that epic battle. The Honourable Lady for Aldershot stressed the involvement of Canadian troops, my Honourable Friend for Bridlington and the Wolds, the Free French, who were hosted in his constituency, and the Honourable Lady for Colchester reminded us of the historic contribution of the Nepalese community, which continues to this day with the incredible contribution of the Gurkha Regiment. It was a particular privilege, Madam Deputy Speaker, to hear from those colleagues who've served in the armed forces. The Honourable and gallant gentleman for Halesowen spoke about the importance of his experience visiting a Ukrainian defence company. I also had that experience recently, and it's a real learning lesson and incredibly inspiring to see. My honourable friend for Exmouth and Exeter East spoke movingly of his grandfather, whose incredible contribution included D-Day, Operation Varsity, and of course the traumatic experience of liberating concentration camps. I hope this inspired him to his own distinguished career in the Marines. And my honourable friend for Huntingdon, in an excellent speech, stressed the crucial role of RAF Molesworth and RAF Witten. Now, we had all the pomp and ceremony on the Mall, but of course the real story of VE Day celebrations is in communities up and down the country, and a number of colleagues spoke about community celebrations, including the Honourable Lady for Mid Sussex, the Honourable Lady for Monmouthshire, and the Honourable Gentleman from Bishop Auckland and Bexley Heath and Crayford. The Honourable Gentleman for Ashford made a fascinating speech reminding us of the important role of RAF Hawkinge in terms of intercepting the flying bombs, as they were called then. Ironic because, of course, we now talk about the drones flying over Ukraine and the menace that they are today. A number of colleagues spoke about the important role of women, especially in wartime industry. The Honourable Gentleman for Brecon, Radnor and Cumtower, the Honourable Lady for Cowdenbeath and Kirkcaldy, who spoke of the role of her grandmother in the defence industry. And a number of colleagues spoke of the contribution of women working on our farms to ensure that we had food security during the war, including my honourable friend, my right honourable friend for Dumfries, Clydesdale and Tweeddale, my neighbour, the Honourable Gentleman for Bury St Edmunds, in a fantastic speech, and the Honourable Gentleman for Strangford, reminding us in particular of the contribution of the Women's Land Army. The Honourable Gentleman for Angus and Perthshire Glens reminded us of what he called the long tail of war and its lasting psychological impact. The Honourable Lady for Innis Mon stressed the important role of RAF Valley, which was certainly one of the most enjoyable visits of my time as a Defence Minister. And finally, earlier in the debate, the chair of the Defence Select Committee made, I thought, an excellent intervention when he said that surely the most important lesson of World War II is to always stand up to aggressors, which is why it's been so important to support Ukraine as they face another European war inflicted without a shred of justification by another aggressive, bullying dictator. I'm incredibly proud of what we did in government to support Ukraine, and like the Honourable Gentleman for Stockton North, I was very moved to see the Ukrainian soldiers joining our VE Day procession yesterday. I hope that one day we will get to attend their VE Day celebration. So to conclude, it is wonderful that our nation has once again had the chance to pay a glorious tribute to that incredible generation who secured victory over tyranny 80 years ago. But we must never forget the lessons from that terrible war, to always stand up for democracy and freedom, and to do so by backing our armed forces and standing strong with our allies against the bullying dictators who threaten us once again.
The Minister Ali Kent.
Well, thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's been a great personal privilege to close this debate today, and I would like to thank my right honourable friend for inspiring opening speech, and every member of this House who has contributed so thoroughly to a memorable and important debate. After the guns fell silent in Europe, during those historic days of May 1945, a period of enduring peace began between the major global powers. That peace was secured by a courageous and undaunted generation of British men and women and has lasted almost 80 years. Those men and women who served on the front line in the factories, down the mines, on the farms, or embedded with their allies, demonstrated the very best of Britain's character. Their grit and their fierce resolve carried Britain through the bleakest of times to victory. The commemorations we've seen this week are a fitting way to pay tribute to the generation and to thank them for what they did for our country, and indeed for the whole world. And as the Minister for Veterans and People, I particularly want to express my profound gratitude to all the serving personnel and veterans who are taking part this week from Britain and across the Commonwealth, and of course our Ukrainian allies who took part in the parade just yesterday. Whether joining the many events around the nation, here in London or across many of our constituencies, in person or watching and listening from home, the nation is eternally grateful for your service and the unflagging sacrifice not just of you, but of your families who serve as well. I've witnessed the cost of conflict firsthand. I stand before this House not only as a minister, but as a military veteran myself. During multiple tours in all corners of the world, I've seen the very best of humanity in the form of remarkable courage and comradeship under pressure. I've also seen its darkest aspects. Never were these two extremes more apparent than during the Second World War. And this week we commemorate 80 years since the liberation of Europe and the West from a period of dark and violent tyranny. We remember all who suffered and fought against the unimaginable horrors of war. We also remember the remarkable British and Allied soldiers who liberated Europe, who witnessed the catastrophic consequences of unchecked authoritarianism that attempted to redraw international boundaries through the use of force. One wise person once said, "History doesn't repeat itself, but it sure does rhyme." And who rose, those individuals who rose to the immense challenge of bringing hope to a place where hopelessness had taken root. Remembering these stories and events is an honour and an obligation. They remind us of the importance of standing up to dictators and aggressors. As with many things, Churchill said it best. It was a victory of the great British nation as a whole, as we've heard today, to draw the sword against tyranny. Madam Deputy Speaker, no duty is more vital to the government than protecting the security of the British people. Even after 8 decades without a major world conflict, the illegal invasion of Ukraine and the ensuing war for the right to self-determination has reminded us that we have no inalienable right to peace. To win a lasting peace, we must deter the use of force through deft diplomacy and, of course, strength. That's why this government is working flat out to build a stronger, more robust armed forces, which values the rewards of service personnel for their courage, their outside contribution to society, and their unwavering commitment to defending our nation. It's why we're making the biggest increase in defence spending since 2010, and it's why we're modernising our defence through a comprehensive defence review, defence reform and industrial strategy. Now I'd like to respond just to some of the points raised during today's debate. I think the honourable friend from Halesowen highlighted a really important point that wars aren't won by armies and navies or air forces, they're won by economies, industries and societies. And I think that's never more telling than in Ukraine itself, where we see a scale of a conflict that is incomprehensible in some cases. In World War II, the UK took just under 400,000 killed in action. In Ukraine, the Russians have already taken 950,000 casualties. That means by the end of this debate today, the Russians will have taken over 2,000 to 3,000 casualties in one single day. Thousands of drone strikes a day, 16,000 artillery rounds used a day, thousands of tanks destroyed. Woe betide any democracy or individual that takes our peace and our democratic system for granted. And I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for Mid-Sussex to pay tribute to the photographic unit. And I do believe that the National Monument is proceeding through the planning procedures as we speak. The monument to Dame Vera Lynn as well, I think we're almost there, and you get my full support with that as we move forward. Madam Deputy Speaker, As this debate draws to a close, I'd like to thank all the members once again for their contributions. The simple fact that it is society that wins wars, and we've heard all the amazing stories across all of our constituencies of where the integral parts, whether it be industry, farmers, the mines, have contributed to the war effort, is truly remarkable. And it's right to recognise that. And it's also right that we've paused from the regular cadence of our political work to recognise the immense scale of sacrifice which led Europe to freedom out of the darkness of violence and tyranny. That generation of our countrymen and women gave their lives so that we might live freely. They leave us and the next generation a reminder that freedom is not free. To be resilient during difficult times and to always remember, because the nation that forgets its defenders will itself be forgotten. In my search for inspiration on how best to close this debate, I stumbled across a quote which captures perhaps the essence of British spirit to fight and defend, and it was by an unknown American soldier. It goes along these lines. Those Brits are a strange old race. They show affection by abusing each other and will think nothing of casually stopping in the middle of a firefight to brew up and make a drink. But I would rather have one British squaddy on the side than an entire battalion of Spetsnaz. Why? Because the British are the only people in this world who, when the chips are down and it seems like there's no hope left, instead of getting sentimental, will strap on their pack, charge their rifle, and calmly and wryly grin, well, let's get after it.
The question is that this House has considered the 80th anniversary of victory in Europe and victory over Japan. As many that appeal and say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. I'll give the front bench a moment to swap over.